A few years ago, I was walking in the woods through a beaten track, and I started to smell this really overpowering sweet smell. Being nosy, I pulled back the undergrowth to have a look. That's when I found a dead body. The guy had obviously been there a while, and he wasn't looking great. All swollen and green and black with various runny bits. I could tell that the local wildlife had also been dining well for a few days. I ended up calling the police, who told me to wait with the body until they arrived. Being in the middle of nowhere, it took some time for them to get there. By then it was dark, and I was just sitting there in the darkness with him for a long time. It turned out he had committed suicide. I'm not a big believer in supernatural, spiritual type of stuff, but for a long time after that, I started having dreams about him, and he would talk to me, and it really wasn't nice things. The dreams were mainly about him, how he was angry I had disturbed this resting place, and he wanted me to kill myself. Now maybe it was just my imagination, but it was all pretty disturbing at that time. Maybe it was some sort of PTSD from having to sit there in the darkness, alone, with a stranger's body like that. He still turns up in my dreams here and there, and there is no doubt that tonight it will happen again after sharing this. Why is it that we on the REZ close our windows, close the blinds, close the curtains? We all been told about what lingers around at night outside, but why should you close your blinds and curtains as well? I was told that evil spirits and bad medicine can enter a home through a window. I have a story from when I was an infant living on the REZ with my father's extended family, out on the Navajo REZ. There was a medicine man that people in the neighborhood suspected of being a skinwalker, or a witch or something. Well, the medicine man ended up dying, and everyone held some type of service for him despite the rumors. Everyone that was there had came back to my grandma's place, which was only several miles from the descendants' former home. On that night, as everyone was getting ready for bed in the house, there was a horrible sound, a loud cry, coming from the direction of the past man's hogan. It was described as a mix between an animal and a human scream, loud enough to wake everyone in the house. My mother, being Christian, she got a bit nervous, but my father, who was traditional, he stood up and started closing all the windows, all the blinds, curtains, and covers in the room. I was told that he did this while not looking outside. All the other members of the family did the same. Nobody said anything, not a single word about it until the next morning, in which many family members said it was most likely the soul of the bad medicine man that was being sent to hell for his crimes in life. I was just a baby when this happened. This is what I was told. My dad said that when they all heard that horrible cry, everyone knew who it was, but nobody said anything. You see, looking outside, especially when you hear something strange, it means that you acknowledge or invite whatever it is closer to your home. That's why when they heard this cry, everyone jumped to action without even looking. And that's why when you go to sleep tonight, if you hear any strange noises, you didn't. After Hurricane Helene, my grandfather wanted to see how his childhood home, which is about a 20-minute drive east of the town, had fared during the devastating weather. On this trip, however, my grandfather shared with me a lot of stories about his childhood. Growing up in Appalachia, I learned a lot about him that I had simply never known about. However, there is one story that actually scared me, and I had trouble sleeping the night after hearing it. I even still have nightmares about it, and I'll tell you that story now. In February of 1954, a few weeks before my grandfather turned 12, his family's little farm had been experiencing some attacks on their animals, mainly the chickens. In the weeks before, they had lost about 7 or 8 chickens from their flock of 30 or so. They had a small property, about an acre or two, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, near a place called Hall Mountain. One night, during a fairly heavy snowstorm, my grandfather's family was awoken to the sounds of chickens screaming and flocking around about 70 or so yards away from the house. My grandfather and his dad, Paul, they immediately jumped into their boots and coats and ran outside to confront what they believed to be some coyotes. As they ran outside the back door, my great-grandfather with his rifle and my grandfather with a pellet gun, they both stopped dead in their tracks as they saw what my grandfather described, the nastiest, most foul-looking human-type creature that you could possibly imagine. A light on the barn illuminated the creature, and my grandfather said that it was almost bare naked, save for what looked to be a bear pelt draped around its shoulders, and it had a dead chicken in its mouth. Paul snapped out of his shock, and he fired a few rounds at the creature. He nicked it once in the upper thigh as it ran across a field, at first on 2 legs, before dropping down on all 4s and disappearing into the woods. My grandfather and his father stood there in shock. They made sure the rest of the chickens and the other animals were alright, before my grandfather was told to go back inside to check on his mom and sister, and then also go back to bed. Apparently, Paul stayed outside for a few more hours, pacing back and forth on the porch, waiting for that creature to come back. My grandfather said that he barely slept the rest of that night, and when he got up the next morning, he saw his father in the living room on their phone. As he was eating breakfast, his father came into the dining room, whispered something to his wife, and sat at the table. When my grandfather was done eating breakfast, his mother left the room and his father cleared his throat and started talking. "I was on the phone with your uncle. He'll be here this afternoon with your cousin. We're gonna go follow the blood trail that was left behind by whatever creature we saw last night. It went down into the holler on the mountain." My grandfather said that he shook his head quietly and didn't really speak the rest of the morning. By 12:30, himself, his father, his uncle Peter, and his cousin Samuel were all walking northwest into the woods, following the bloody trail that was left behind the previous night. My grandfather said it felt like an hour or so must have passed before anyone spoke. His uncle Peter, who was much more of a hunter than Paul, stopped everyone and pointed at something slightly up the trail. The tracks led up to a spot in the snow that was just soaked in blood. My grandfather, he said it looked like something had just kneeled over and died. What really shocked them as they got closer was how it appeared like whatever had laid there had been dragged deeper into the woods. They began following the new trail that had been dragged through the snow, and they began noticing a few sets of tracks alongside the trail. It was at this moment when my grandfather noticed his father switching the safety 2 off. They trekked alongside the trail a little further until they got to a small frozen stream. On the other side, tucked under a massive cliff overhang, was a cave entrance. My grandfather said it was about 20 feet across and maybe about 7 feet tall. The bloody drag marks and the tracks led right across into the cave. Paul and Peter told the boys to wait behind a rock, and if they didn't shout back that they were fine in 5 minutes, to run back home and call the police. They walked over the river and stood at the cave entrance before shining the light into it and slowly walking in. My grandfather said that about 4 minutes passed before they heard his uncle, but that it seemed like forever. They saw his uncle Peter come out, and his father shortly followed. My grandfather said that they were both pale as a ghost, and that they barely spoke on the long hike back. My grandfather and Samuel begged Paul and Peter to tell them what they saw, but the 2 men wouldn't budge, and said that they would all talk later. They all got back to my grandfather's house around 3 that afternoon, and his Uncle Peter and Samuel immediately got in their truck and left without saying anything. My grandfather and his father walked in through the back door into the kitchen, where his mother was waiting. Paul hugged her and whispered something to her. She nodded and went into a separate room. Paul sat down at a desk in the kitchen and motioned for my grandfather to bring a chair over and sit. My grandfather did so, and this is what Paul told him. Your uncle and I went into that cave, and we saw people. They're not people like you, or me, or anyone you know. They're very different. They live deep in the woods, and they don't leave, ever. They're almost like animals. I suppose you might call them wild. It seems like they've been living deep in those woods longer than anyone has ever been here. We saw the person I shot last night. He must have died, and his people were giving him a burial. I do believe they saw us, and they did acknowledge us. They didn't seem mad, but I know we are not welcome back there. Do not ever go across that creek. Everything over there belongs to them, and we will leave it to them. My grandfather said that was the only time his father ever spoke of what he saw in that cave. His father never went back, nor did he. I know the whole feral people concept is up in the air, and most people don't believe it, which I completely understand. Honestly, I don't think I do. But the way my grandfather spoke about it, the tone of his voice, especially during certain parts of the story, I fully believe he was being honest. He truly saw his father shoot a feral human, and his father and his uncle truly saw a small feral community living in a cave deep in the Appalachian hills. So I work as a radio technician. I move across the country to fill jobs. I got a contract to work at a radio station up in Alaska. The flight is paid for, and there's a bunch of supplies on site. There was also room for lodging. Otherwise, I was going to have to pay for a hotel in the nearby town, which was miles away. I already didn't like the sound of a radio station in the Alaska wilderness, miles from any civilization with less than enough workers. Despite this, I accepted the contract because it paid much more than any job, at least any job that I had taken before, and not having to pay for a hotel or food was a big bonus. I've been instructed to take a gun with me, maybe a rifle that shot a nice size caliber. I ended up taking my .336 and Winchester, and I also took an old shitty .22 with me. For your sake, I'm gonna shorten the story by about 3,000 words. I won't go into boarding the plane, getting the guns, signing up for travel, and establishing a residency in Alaska. So I'm gonna jump ahead to when we landed in Fairbanks. The radio station itself was in the middle of nowhere. They did underplay how isolated this place was. It's tucked in southeast of Fairbanks. The landscape is a mountain full of hills, and everything is rough. Most of all, it's cold as hell. So I drive for just over 2 hours on 107M from Fairbanks, and then I get on an Airbus helicopter that's going to take me to the closest area to the radio station, and then hike with a local guide about 10 miles across tough and snowy terrain. Finally, to the radio station. The guide ends up staying there for the evening. Something about a storm coming in. The other staff and myself got acquainted. There was Kevin the groundskeeper, who had grown up nearby in Delta Junction. He was only 17, and he was going off to college soon. Apparently, this was one reason the place was undermanned. The pay was over minimum wage, and aside from the technicians, all the other jobs were entry level, with kids who worked there during the summer, and then they would leave when they went to college. There was this other guy whose name I can't remember, but a few of the others seemed to be quite familiar with him. He was around 30. He was one of the 8 or so local mountain guides. There was also Nathan, a 20-year-old guy saving up to move to Anchorage with his girlfriend. He was also the other radio technician. There was supposed to be another employee, but they stopped showing up about a month prior to when I got there. I put my stuff in the lodging room. I go out to talk with the others, and just to get a bite to eat, I enter the main room and notice that the guide is gone. Where did he end up going? Nathan looked at me. He ended up leaving. Said it was getting late. I remember telling him that he just let him go during the storm. He insisted that he said something about having to get home soon, and that he would be fine. After all, he is a guide. He knows these mountains better than the bears do. I wasn't fine with this, but I guess Nathan was right. I wasn't going to make an argument out of it. It did bug me from the beginning that a guide as knowledgeable as he just got up and left in a storm. And then the bad news came about a week later. I was doing my job as I normally would, and sometimes some mini trips outside to restart the heater. It was located in a mini shed near the station. The bad news, well, you guessed it. It was about the tour guide. He had been found half a mile from the start of the trail leading up to the station. He was found, eaten, but it was unclear by what or how exactly he died. This scared all of us. Enough that Kevin asked me and Nathan to teach him how to load fire and also maintain a gun just in case something happened. We spent a few evenings going over basics. I let him carry around my shitty 22 as well. We all started carrying guns. We did so when we had to go outside and just around the station in general. Nathan had brought his 20 gauge M2. It didn't completely ease the tension, but it did make us feel a little bit safer. We got a fax and a document saying an officer would come up to talk to us about the guide's death. A week passed, then another, and then another, repeating this process. It had been 4 weeks and some days since the officer was supposed to be here. We weren't supposed to use the radio equipment for anything besides broadcasting the intended content, but we figured this was important enough to bend the rules. We got into contact with the local police station. Apparently, they couldn't locate a guide to assist an officer up to the station. They had sent one officer. He hadn't been reported back. They said a blizzard was moving in and would be here within a few days. We told him what we knew about the guide before his death over the radio. They instructed us to stay put and wait out the storm. They told us to keep an open channel with them for as long as possible. 2 days passed, and around 2:30 in the morning, we lose contact with the police station. I end up working until 10 a.m. trying to get in contact with them, but no luck. Kevin ends up using his old brick phone to call the local town's municipal center. Its reception is awful. Every other call cannot be completed as dialed. We end up getting into contact with local government workers. We asked them to communicate with the police station just to let them know that we're fine. We also tell them to get into contact with the contracting company. Nathan at this point was ready to jump ship, and to be honest, I was too. For about 3 days we were stuck like that, not able to broadcast, little contact with the outside world. I still remember the day that we got the message. I had been trying to get some sleep during the storm, since we couldn't do our normal jobs anyways. I was shaken awake by Nathan, who told me to get up and come with him. When I finally came to my senses, I saw why he was panicking. The whole power was off, not just the heat, the entire thing. I get up and come into the main room where Kevin is sitting wrapped in 2 heavy blankets and also a puffy jacket. He has the 22 on the table. "What's going on?" I ask. "The power went out a few minutes ago, and we heard something outside. I loaded your rifle for you." My rifle was sitting on the table. I then say, "What did you hear?" "We heard scraping. It sounded like something was trying to claw itself inside." I said, "It's most likely just an animal. It's a blizzard after all." I'll go out and get the heater running. I went to the door with my rifle in hand. I opened the door. Snow falls into the doorway, and the door is slammed back by the wind. We decided to wait out the storm the best that we could, but we had to get warmer. Nathan and Kevin were trying to start a fire. As I was gathering blankets, jackets, or any cloth or tarp that I could, I found about 5 blankets in total, as well as a few towels and a tarp. We huddled around the small fire, and about 4 hours later, the power finally came back. We assumed that this meant that the storm had died down a little bit, so once again, I made my way to the door with my rifle. I opened it, and a bit of snow fell in, but the door wasn't blown shut immediately. I tried walking out through a few feet of snow. By the time that I got to the shed, I was very out of breath. I opened the door to find the heater already running. Damn it, all of that for nothing. I'm halfway back to the station when I feel that horrible sensation of somebody watching, and as I get near, I picked up on a horrible smell, a musky smell. It was like a wet dog and hot breath, and then I saw something. I'm not sure what it was, but it was just for a second. It looked like something darting away into the distance, or at least out of my sight. I went through the door, and I was like, what the fuck is that smell? I slammed the door shut, my heart beating. They said they didn't smell anything, asking what I was talking about. I opened the door again. It must be out here then. Come and smell it, I said. But they just say to close the door because it's cold. I guess the smell drafted into the station and cut off his sentence. Nathan and Kevin began coughing and gagging. I closed the door thinking it would help, but the air started feeling thick, like physically heavier than air is supposed to be. I also began gagging. After about a minute of hell, it finally goes away. It did linger there for a few days, and never went away completely. We checked back with the people that Kevin had called. There was no luck in getting in contact with the contracting company. They did help us establish a connection with the police station though. They said that there was an officer that was sent our way, but he was still not back, and presumed lost in the storm. We ended up requesting help to get out of here at this point. We still had enough food and water for about 2 months. We asked about the possibility of a search and rescue team coming to get us. We only received a one-word response. That was unlikely. We had packed our stuff by the door and got ready to sleep for the night. That night, I woke up with a chill going through my body. I opened my eyes to see that there was snow everywhere. On my bed, on me, all over the fucking room. The door to the room was open, which I remember closing. I got up and ran out into the main room. The front door was wide open, and one of the packs was gone. I knew it was Kevin's. His was the one closest to the door. My pack, which was next to Kevin's, had a huge tear down the middle, uneven, and about the size of a bear's paw. There was some sort of black sticky stuff on the bag as well, which smelled like rot and musk, combined in a horrible symphony of smells. I slammed the door shut and turned on the lights. I went to wake up Nathan and Kevin. Nathan woke up instantly, but Kevin's eyes were frozen shut. We spent the morning putting warm water on his eyes. Eventually he got them open. He could see for the most part, but he kept complaining about his eyes being cold and also painful, despite the rest of his body being warm, even hours after they had been open. The next 2 days, however, were pretty uneventful. Eventually, a team consisting of a police officer and 2 local mountain specialists came to pick us up. We were hesitating to tell them about the weird things that happened, but eventually they inquired about our time there, and we told them. They said that they often get reports like that from people who worked at the station before. They told us that they never had a reason to go up there, and that it was just some kids getting spooked by the shadows, but that this was the worst. Even after we left that place, the whole ordeal wasn't really over. Of course, we had to speak to the police about everything, mostly about the missing people, but they wanted to know everything else as well. We did end up staying there for another month because the police investigation and because we had technically broken our contract with the company and also the broadcasting company. The contractors decided not to pursue any legal action, and we and the broadcasting company settled out of court. Even after coming home, some weird things are still happening. I know they're related to this whole thing, but whenever I tell the story, whether it's virtually or in person, my dogs always act up if they're with me, even when I'm not home. My neighbors without fail tell me that my dogs make a ton of noise. It could be a coincidence, or them trying to scare me, but hey, you just never know. I guess just be careful of any jobs you get. It might be away from people, or civilization itself. On the REZ, there are many different types of spirits that attach themselves to people. Suicide, depression, perversion, drug and alcohol spirits. All these type of spirits can follow you around. Some of them might even live in your own home, only if it's a suitable home for them. You might have one, two of them living with you. And the crazy thing is that you might not even know it. 2 days after being drunk, I was asked to come help put up a sweat lodge and later go inside. As the firekeeper, I stood in front of the grandfathers, and that's when I heard somebody inside of my head. "We don't want you here. Don't come back." I rubbed it off as my thoughts. During the ceremony, I let the elder speak through me, but at the final round of the sweat, I heard who the grandfathers were speaking about earlier. I heard somebody praying for me, and he asked. I heard the conductor praying for me, and he was asking, "Are you okay?" I told him to keep praying for me. The one who the grandfathers were speaking to was a Wendigo spirit. That's when I heard many voices that last round. Grandmothers told the spirit, "We don't want you here." He fell over and started crying. "I've done so many bad things. I don't like you." He was speaking to the grandmothers and the man conducting the ceremony. I truly believe I ended up bringing some sort of alcoholic spirit with me. I ended up painting a picture later. I always do them after ceremonies. I even painted how the spirit appeared to me. I also painted a human skull with horns like a gold ram. I had actually seen so many other things, but the alcohol spirit is what stuck with me the most. I learned the hard way not to have alcohol still in your system during the ceremony. I heard if you have alcohol, you're supposed to wait about 3 or 4 days before you go to ceremony, because it takes that long for your spirit to return. Our ceremonies and the Red Road is a beautiful life. Best wishes to everybody. Thanks for listening. I thought the creepiest thing to have ever happened to me was when I thought that some sort of creature was gonna eat me alive. It happened when I started a hike by a 30-acre hill property. It turns out that there were about 20 wild turkeys that run all the property around that hill. I had walked up on them and ran off while about 5 of them flew across the little valley to the other side of the hill. The damn things are loud when they fly, and that was the first time I ever saw a turkey fly. Like, imagine running and you hear all these wild turkeys behind you. That was the creepiest and funniest thing that's ever happened to me out there while hiking, until the following. This was back when it was okay to build permanent tree stands nailed into trees. I had scouted out a new area. It was pretty open, except one grove of head-high palmettos and brush that came from behind my stand, and they went into the swamp. I was able to climb into a fork of an oak tree by climbing a small dogwood next to it. After hoisting up my wood and nailing up a very stable platform and a seat about 15 to 20 up, I dumped out some corn and left. This was in the summer as I was hog hunting. It was 2 weeks before I made it back to hunt. Everything was fine as I walked in before daylight and got settled in. And lots of fresh hog signs that I could see by my small light. After everything got quiet back down, I was just sitting in the dark. Now, this is when I first caught that feeling of somebody watching me. I have hunted, camped, and I have also grown up in the woods. And I've been everywhere, including the darkest, deepest swamps. And I have never felt this feeling. I wasn't scared because I didn't know to be. I just couldn't put my finger on it. The feeling never changed, but I couldn't get used to it. I was just on edge, I guess. I never saw or heard any animals that morning, at least from what I can remember. That's until I was climbing down about mid-morning. I had lowered my rifle and was in the process of slithering from the oak to the little dogwood when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. About the same time that I heard it, I heard something crashing and just barely caught sight of something running through the palmettos parallel to me. I say barely because it looked like a huge brown dog. Right away I thought it was a buffalo. Crazy, huh? It crushed through and I heard it hit the water. It sounded like a herd of hogs going through. I wrote it off as a deer that had jumped. I thought about that sight and the feeling I had all morning as I drove back home to do a little bit of work before hunting again that evening. Around 2 or so that afternoon, I was again walking back into the stand, still thinking about the oddness of the morning. It was only about a quarter of a mile or so walk, and I was there and settled in. Everything was just so quiet. I had been sitting maybe an hour or so when I heard the faint splash of hogs, I assumed, across the thicket in the swamp. As it got louder, instead of that excited, eager feeling you would normally get, I was getting nervous. It was so weird because I never felt that way before. What I thought were a bunch of hogs turned out to be one single critter. When it was within 100 yards, I could hear it, so plain and clear. Whatever it was in no hurry. I had scouted all this out, and I knew the water that it was in was waist deep on me, and this thing was picking its feet, or legs, clear of the water as it walked. I could hear the splash, almost like it was trying to be quiet. I thought that maybe it was another person. That's until I thought about how deep that water was. I would never point a gun at a noise, or anything I wasn't planning to kill dead. But as that noise got louder, and got to the edge of the thicket, I was looking down the fucking barrel. But still, you gotta know me to know how serious this must have been. I was really shaking. It then got to the edge of the water with about 40 yards of thicket before the open ground between us. It crashed about 10 or 15 yards and then went quiet. Real quiet. No sound. No frogs. No crickets. No birds. Nothing. Maybe I just imagined it. But I thought I could hear something every now and then. It was getting dark by then, and to say I was shaken would be an understatement. I never saw or heard anything else that evening, but I walked out backwards right before dark. I was so put off by it, I had forgotten my bag. It was hanging on a nail in the stand. I realized that when I was driving home. I told my granddad about it, and he, of course, made fun of me. If all that wasn't bad enough, here's the crazy part most people don't believe. It was 2 days later before I got the nerve to go back after my bag. I carry a shotgun this time as I felt more secure with it. I doubt that I could even hit anything at this point. It was an old one, and I kept my thumb on the hammer the whole walk in. And of course I went in midday. I kept my eyes peeled as I slipped in towards my stand. Like I said, it was pretty open, except for that thicket place, which would be on the other side of my stand from where I was coming in. I got about 35 yards or so from my stand and glanced up. It was gone. I don't remember seeing it pile on the ground below, but it wasn't in the tree. I could see white all around, where it was like the bark had been scratched and clawed all to hell. I never looked back, and to this day, I have not been back to that swamp. A few years later, after my little incident, it was all clear and cut, and part of that swamp was filled in. There are houses now, and I have told a few people about it, but I mostly need a few drinks to talk about it. Kinda like how I am right now. Only one person has believed me, but he won't tell me why. He also hunted this area, and maybe he had a run-in with something as well. I'm not really asking anyone to believe this. I just thought that I would tell it. There are stories and legends about Sasquatch-like creatures in North America, going back through different centuries, before the Europeans even discovered this continent. This story takes place on my REZ, the Walker River Paiute REZ in western Nevada, at a tribal elder's house. Those from my REZ will know who I'm talking about. This tribal elder was the oldest member of the tribe when he passed 2 years ago, well into his 90s. When he passed on, his house and property were being disputed between nieces and nephews and his common-law wife, who was from another REZ. Her grandson, fresh out of prison, ended up staying there. He was a big party person, and he brought his tweaker white girlfriend down to stay in the house with him. None of them had any income, so they started selling off the elder's belongings. They didn't realize that some of what they were getting rid of wasn't just old stuff. It was sacred. The elder had medicine bundles for protection and healing that was never supposed to be disturbed, but they didn't care. They sold it off like it was nothing. Now, who would buy stuff like this? You'll learn living on the REZ that there are things that you shouldn't do, items that shouldn't be touched or messed with. However, there are evil people with evil intentions that want items that belong to the dead so that they can do their witchcraft ways. Or maybe some people just buy these items out of ignorance. Anyways, soon after, the grandson kicked his girlfriend out, and he moved in a girl from the local REZ. Another tweaker, just 18. They kept selling off the elder's things, and eventually, the guy got thrown in jail. Our tribal council voted to kick him off the REZ, and he left the house keys with the girl. Now, one of my close friends went out there with her one night to hang out and get high, but when he came back, he was shaken. He told me some messed up stuff went down at the house, and my friend knew better than to go hang around inside his house because of who it belonged to. The whole situation about the grandson being thrown in jail and kicked out was known around the REZ. Everybody knew to stay away from this place. There were quite a few rumors and stories. So he told me they were sitting in the living room, watching TV. He said they started hearing footsteps on the roof. At first, they thought it might be an animal, but the steps were too heavy, like someone pacing back and forth above them. Then, out of nowhere, they heard a low voice coming from one of the windows. It wasn't speaking the American language. It sounded different, but guttural, like someone was chanting some spell or something wrong. Then, my friend said they looked out the window to see what the noise was, and that's when they saw them. The figures. 4 of them. At first he thought they were just people walking around, but he realized something wasn't right. These figures weren't fully human. They were gray, like shadows, but their shapes were all twisted and wrong, shifting around. They moved in a slow, unnatural way, circling the ground outside. He said they were tall, too tall, and hunched over like something was crawling beneath their skin. Their limbs looked weird, bending at odd angles, and their heads would twitch unnaturally, like they were struggling to keep a human form. As they moved closer to the house, he saw their eyes, black pits that seemed to draw in all the light around them. Terrified, they pulled the curtains back, trying to ignore the sounds, but when they peeked out again, one of the figures was right there, standing at the window, staring in. Its face was twisted, the skin was stretched tight over sharp bones, and the mouth was pulled into a grin, but it was the eyes, the empty eyes, black, soulless, as he described them, that made him freeze. He swore the thing was looking straight into his soul, like it was putting some curse on him. They didn't know what to do. Running outside seemed like a death sentence, but staying inside felt no better. So they went into the kitchen, going down onto the floor, trying to stay out of sight of the windows. He whispered that they need to stay silent. He said that every creak of the house, every bit of wind outside sent their hearts racing. Then, the scratching sounds began. It got worse. It sounded like someone, or something, was digging, not just outside, but right underneath them. My friend grabbed the kitchen knife, as if that would do anything. But what else could he do? The noise continued, growing louder, almost like whatever was down there was trying to tunnel its way in. They stayed like that for hours, curled up on the kitchen floor, trying to figure out what to do. Every now and then they would hear footsteps again, on the roof, around the sides, or pacing back and forth just beyond the windows. He said it felt like they were being surrounded. As dawn was starting to creep up, the noises stopped. No more digging, no more footsteps, just an eerie silence. That's when the girl finally told him everything, the truth about the house, and what happened ever since the elder passed. She explained how they started selling items that were in a medicine bundle, items that should have never been moved, let alone be sold. But they had, and in doing so, they had invited something into the home. Hearing that made my friend sick to his stomach. He realized that whatever had been watching them, whatever had been trying to get inside, wasn't just some sort of spirit. He knew they couldn't stay any longer. Fuck this, he said under his breath, and with his heart pounding, he finally decided that they would run to the door. As they scrambled outside, expecting one of these things to come rushing at them. However, the yard was empty, or at least, it looked like it. He said that when they got to his truck, his stomach dropped. The door was open, like someone was inside. All his stuff was everywhere. On the front was a stick, tied up and twisted, and wrapped in something. My friend knew what it was. A witching stick. Something used in dark ceremonies. That's when it hit him. These things weren't just spirits. They were skinwalkers, and they must have been doing some sort of ceremony or curse on the house. He then told me that panic surged through him as he grabbed the stick and threw it as far as he could into the brush. He didn't care where it landed. He just knew he couldn't let it stay with him. They jumped into the truck and peeled out of there, dirt kicking up behind them as they sped away from the house, away from whatever had been lurking there, hoping that it wouldn't follow them back into town. Over the next few days, my friend felt like something was after him. He would see someone moving just out of the corner of his eye, always watching. At night, he would wake up to the sound of scratching at his window, and when he would look outside, he said he would see those same figures standing just beyond the tree line, waiting. He knew he couldn't keep living like that, in fear, as everybody knows that these things, these skinwalkers, thrive off of fear. So he went to go see a medicine man. The medicine man listened to everything, his face getting more serious as he told him everything. When my friend finished, the elder just sat in silence and then spoke to him. He said this was happening because of what had been done in the elder's house. Sacred things had been disturbed, sold off, and in doing so, they had invited something evil. Not specifically him, but the people who lived there. You should never touch a medicine bundle. Also, the moment you laid hands on that stick, it was like you accepted what it was meant for. He explained that these items, done in dark ceremonies, carry a power that's not easily understood. They aren't just items. They're beyond your understanding. Tossing it aside didn't do anything. By touching it, you accepted the curse, you can say. The curse it carried. The medicine man's words scared my friend, as he was finally starting to understand the gravity of what happened. The elder went on to explain that this was not something to take lightly, especially in the home of a medicine man who had passed on. When a medicine man walks off into the spirit side, you must leave their things alone. The medicine man warned, you don't go inside their home, and you never touch what belonged to them. Those items are tied to their spirit, to the work that they done, and disturbing these items is like opening a door that you can't close. The medicine man made it clear that some of these items are sacred, part of the owner. Once that person has passed on, those items are not just left behind for nothing. To disturb them is to disturb the dead. It's like pulling them back, and in doing so, you allow other things to enter the place. My friend sat frozen, realizing that by simply being in the house, by even being a witness about what happened there, he had become part of this whole thing. The medicine man performed the cleansing ceremony, using herbs and chants to sing. Smoke from burning sage and sweetgrass filled the air. My friend said that he could feel the heaviness lifting, but the elder warned him that some things, once disturbed, leave scars that never fully healed, and that there would be people out there, evil people, using this as an opportunity for their witchcraft ways. After the ceremony, my friend said that he stopped seeing things and feeling like something was after him. He didn't see the figures anymore, but the medicine man told him to stay far away from that house. It was a place that had been tainted, and anyone who set foot in there risked being drawn into something they couldn't escape. As for the girl, she was never seen again. She stopped coming around, and no one seemed to know what happened to her. Maybe she left the reservation, or maybe the Skinwalkers had gotten to her first. All I know is that after that night, my friend never set foot near that house again. One last thing that my friend told me: never enter the home of someone who has passed on, and what belongs to them must stay with them. So my parents were big outdoor buffs. My father was an ex-champion boat racer, and my mom was an Alabama race country girl, so they always wanted to go camping, fishing, and do all that stuff. When I was little, they went on a trip with some of their friends when I was about 10, which would be about 16 years ago. Since then, they refused to go camping anymore, ever. My dad told me the story sometime after I turned 18. It still makes me wonder considering the following. My parents moved a lot, and they only had one set of friends that they really kept in touch with at all times: Danny and Lisa. Danny and Lisa were not really outdoor nuts like my parents, but they were friends, and it's fun to go camping with your friends, right? So they all planned a 5-day trip to the lake, which was south of where we lived, with a creek that was on Danny's father's property, so they could camp out on that property and fish all they wanted to. They could then go to the lakes and everything else. I'm gonna tell the rest of the story from my dad's point of view. Well, from his account. The first 2 days were quite normal, just camping, drinking, sharing stories while fishing, going on a boat, and water skiing. It was pretty much heaven. It was just young adult parents having fun. On the second night, everyone kept hearing these weird noises and barks like two dogs were in a fight, but they were both hurt and just yelping the whole time. They figured it was coyotes and they slept. The next day, they continued on their adventures, but at night, they kept hearing these noises, but they were extremely close to the camp, so my father and Danny went up to see if they could scare them off, while my mom and Lisa stayed behind. They were scared, hiding inside a tent, most likely reading the Bible. Anyways, my dad and Danny went out to look for these fighting coyotes, searching by following the sound. My dad had a shotgun, and Danny had a machete. They were hoping to scare these coyotes or whatever it was with a gunshot. They then got to a clearing, and they could hear the noise extremely loud, but it seemed to be coming from everywhere, as if the sounds were kind of distant from each other. Now, my dad isn't really scared of anything, and he swears he saw Bigfoot when he was 14, but this was different. Randomly, he just started telling Danny to go back. No questions, no explanation, just, Danny, we need to go back. So they did, but the sounds didn't fade away this time. Danny nervously asked my dad what was going on, but my dad wouldn't tell him. He just kept shushing him. Danny's a bit of a goofball, which is why I got along with Uncle Danny. So he thought my dad was getting him back for a prank. He kept nudging my dad, trying to get him to say, "You fell for it." But my dad never said anything. Finally, they got close to the creek, a ways up from the camp, and that's when my dad told Danny to run, fast, like, run away right now. And that's when my dad took off. Danny apparently followed but tripped and called for my dad. But my dad, who tears up and chokes up at this part, which is also uncharacteristic of him, refused to go back for him, even though Danny started calling for help. Danny was yelling that his leg was broken. It hurt, but my dad just kept running. Then, my dad, my mom, and Lisa all said that they heard what sounded like a really loud mountain lion growl. Almost like two lions going at it, amplified by 70 times. That's how loud it was. It made my dad's ears ring. After this noise, Danny stopped screaming for help. My dad got back to camp, and the ladies asked what the hell was going on, but my dad just said something was out there. My mom, being the practical woman that she is, said, "What was it?" But my dad wouldn't answer. Lisa was freaking out, asking where Danny was. My dad just kept saying, "He'll be here in a few minutes." But it wasn't a few minutes. A few hours passed, and the ladies were extremely worried about Danny. My dad apparently would cringe whenever they said something. Eventually, from the opposite side that my dad had arrived from, came Danny, walking up just fine to the camp, not saying anything. Something my mom says that she won't forget because this is what tipped her off that something was very wrong. Danny first walked up and nudged his way next to my mom, but after the weird look and death stare from my father, he moved closer to Lisa, who had been nagging at him for about 10 minutes. He would either just say yes or no and just stare into the fire. My dad finally asked Danny what happened to his leg. Danny looked up, confused. My dad told him, "I thought you said it was broken." Danny then looked at him and replied, "Broken?" And then, as if on cue, he just started yelling, my leg, I think it's broken." The ladies then grabbed the med kits and first aid and water, saying that it was him going into shock, but upon getting his jeans off, he actually refused to help them and made it hard for them to remove them. There was no obvious break, there was no blood, just bruises up and down his side. Lisa kept asking what happened, but he would just grunt and wave her hands away from him. My dad then said, "He's fine, just let him sleep." They then went into their tents. They said that they heard Lisa nagging on one side, arguing with Danny because he would never reply when she would ask him questions. So she finally said she was just gonna go to the bathroom and pee. Danny asked if he could come with her since there were animals out there. In not so many words, she said okay, and they left. My dad woke up around 10 in the morning and started making breakfast. Danny and Lisa were gone. My mom asked where they were, but my dad wouldn't reply. After a little while, they both came back, without saying anything. They weren't even holding hands, in each other's arms, or even with their arms over the shoulder, or anything like they always were. They were just standing next to each other. They refused food, and Danny would randomly yell out, my leg, as Lisa kept complaining of feeling sick. My mom suggested that they should go home and call off the whole trip on account of Danny's leg, which now was not limping at all, to my mom's horrified recollection. The two nodded, and my father just kind of looked at them. They all agreed, so Danny and Lisa got into my parents' car, not theirs, and they just waited. They didn't even pack up their tents, food, coolers, bag, or anything. My mom then came over and asked if they were gonna grab their things, and they shook their heads. My dad then asked, "Why don't you take your own car?" And they both said at the same time, "Broken," almost like in a creepy, practiced way. My dad sighed, packed up the car, and they drove off. Danny and Lisa stayed quiet the whole way back, except for the random mumblings with each other. My parents then took them home and came and got me, and we could tell something was wrong. Besides them coming home days early, they said that Danny got hurt, and that's why they came home. A few days later, I asked if we could go see them, but my dad replied, "No," a little too quickly. So I thought he was just mad at me, so I left to go play in my room. A few weeks later, I asked about Uncle Danny again, and my dad said that we weren't gonna go see them no more. I wasn't mad, but I was curious, so I asked why, and he told me something about his dad being sick, and I was pretty sad about it, so I eventually just forgot about it, and life moved on. So about 5 years later, I'm at a supermarket where I used to live when all of this happened. It was also right by where Danny and Lisa lived, only on the other side of the road. When I was 10, I was never allowed to go over, but now that I was driving, I decided to go see the old house and check out Danny and Lisa's house. I'm driving down slowly, almost creeping down the street, when I spot Danny walking down. So I'm really excited and I flag him down. I pull over and I start talking to him. He seemed a little stiff to me, kind of robotic, I guess you could say, especially when he gave me a hug, but it was way too tight. I asked Danny how he's been, and he said he's been okay. I asked him where Lisa was, and he said at home. So I asked him if I could go say hi to her, and he agreed. I walked with him, and I asked him about all kinds of people and tried to catch up with him, but he didn't seem to remember or care about 90% of it, which seemed kind of strange because Danny was always my awesome, involved in everything Uncle Danny. So I asked him a couple obvious trick questions, and he failed them. Now I'm a little bit nervous, but I just brush it off as I was excited to see both of them, and I hadn't talked to them in a long time. So we get to his door, and he opens it, and that's when the smell of a rotten meat locker pours out. A horrible smell just hits my nostrils. The place is a wreck. There's stuff everywhere. Everything is coated in dust, and nothing looks clean. Laundry is everywhere. There are no lights on, and it's just a mess. I ask, "What happened here?" And he just grunted, a really weird, almost guttural grunt. So I ask after Lisa, and she yelled from the kitchen. She was just behind a wall facing the room, but the wall wasn't a full wall, like with the top touching the ceiling, so I could smell something cooking. I walked into the kitchen expecting to see Lisa making some normal food, and I planned on asking Lisa why Danny was acting weird. But instead, what I saw is unforgettable. She was standing in the kitchen, naked, covered in blood, cooking some kind of mangled mess, surrounded by thousands of bones. I was just smart enough to notice a pile of collars in the corner, like actual pet collars. I screamed, and that's when Danny lunged at me. I kind of sidestepped away from him and ran out the door. Danny gave chase after me, and I got to the car and noped out as fast as I could. I got home, called the police, and gave the address. Then I went straight to my dad. He punched me in the face and overheard the conversation with the police, especially when I gave the address. I tried to apologize, and he just yelled at me. He then hit me again and then hugged me and said he was so sorry. I tried to ask him, but he rather strongly told me to shut up about it and forget about it. The police then came to my house and told me they didn't find anyone living there, but my story matched the description of an absolute nightmare. They told me that they suspected that the previous owners left and that a mixture of wild animals and homeless people had been living there. My dad, being the genius that he is, asked why the house hadn't been closed off or why the bill payments hadn't been an issue. The police would stammer and said that they would look into it. Apparently, Danny's father had still been paying for it all, as per some agreement when they got married. I still hadn't seen them since then, and my dad has only told me the story once beforehand. My meeting up with Danny was pure coincidence and only made the story much worse. A couple of years after all that happened, me and my dad got very drunk together. Then, in a drunken state, he told me the story and what happened to Danny. He said he knew what they were, but in my opinion, better Danny than my dad. Don't play with the fire, the locals in Romania used to say. I didn't understand it at first, even though I knew they are very superstitious people. I'm a construction engineer, and I've been recently sent to Romania with the company for a big contract that we won, the construction of a 27 floors building of business offices. I arrived at Bucharest Friday, and the project was set to begin Monday, so I had the weekend for myself. I wanted to visit the city, have some fun, since it was my first time in Romania, but I didn't know anyone. My colleague Kevin was going to get here on Saturday, and the other members of the team had the flights booked on Sunday. It was 6 p.m. I was in my hotel room when the phone rang. It was Kevin. "Hey man, how is it there? Tell me the first impression." "Hey Kev, I don't really know yet. I mean, the city looks nice, but I haven't been anywhere yet. I'm still in the room. I wish I knew someone to go out tonight with, have a couple of beers, but I guess I'll have to wait for you tomorrow. I don't like going out alone." "Why don't you try to hang out with some locals?" Kevin asked. "And how do you expect me to do that? Go to random strangers and ask them to hang out with me?" I laughed. "Try the local Reddit. Go and create a post. Just say that you're new in town and if there's anyone who would want to go out for a beer or something." "You know what? I think I'll do that. I'll test the beer for you, and tomorrow when we go out, I'll know which one is good. Well, I gotta go. See you tomorrow." I got off the phone, opened my laptop, and headed onto Reddit. I created a post. "Hey everyone, I just arrived for the first time in Bucharest, and I was wondering if there's someone willing to show me around, go out for a beer. By the way, I don't speak Romanian, so it would be nice if you spoke English too." A few replies came, welcoming me to the city, wishing me a pleasant stay, and stuff like that. And then the following reply came. "Hey man, we're a bunch of Reddit friends who frequently go out for beer, and we actually have scheduled a meeting tonight. You can join us if you like. DM me for more details." I clicked on the account. I reviewed it a bit, and I found out that this guy was mostly interested in cats, technology, and cooking. I sent him a DM telling him that I would like to join them, and to give me some details about where we would be going and when to meet. He responded with the name of a bar, which looked pretty nice from the pictures on Google, and to be there outside at 9 p.m. Then he sent me his phone number. It was already 7:30 p.m. by now, so I jumped in the shower, got dressed, and called an Uber. I got to the location 10 minutes earlier, and I saw about 5 guys around their 20s waiting outside. I took my phone out and called the number that he sent me. Then I saw one of the guys picking up his phone and answering. "I'm here. I think I see you," I said, a bit confused, because this could also just been a coincidence of timing and phone calls. He looked around, fixed his eyes on me, and said, "Yeah, that's us, man. Come on over." I always been an extrovert. However, meeting a new group of foreign guys made me a bit nervous. I walked to them. "Hey guys, I'm Ross. Nice to meet you." "Hey Ross, I'm Andre," the guy that I spoke on the phone with said. Then he pointed to the other guys and said, "This is Mihai, Dan, Angelo, and Bogdan." We headed inside, got ourselves a table, and ordered some beers. The guy seemed curious about me and made me feel like the center of attention, but not in a weird or awkward way. I found out that they are all students on different colleges, and they all met on the local Reddit some years ago and became friends. Angelo was studying to become a doctor. Mihai was passionate about music, and he also had 2 rap songs already. Bogdan was a very dedicated gamer, which made him skip most of his classes and had to repeat the last year of college. This actually made me laugh. Dan was trying to become a bodybuilder, and that was a visible theme. I told him about myself, what I do for a living, about the project that we're about to start, and about my passion for the paranormal. Well, if you like paranormal, we have a haunted lake here. It's close by. It's called the Witch's Pond, Angelo said. After a short pause, he continued. It's also said that at night, witches are casting spells, and if you go there, bad things will happen. Not even the animals are drinking from it. Really, I've always been excited about stories with haunted places, but I never got the chance to visit one. So where is it at exactly? I asked. You want to go there? Bogdan asked. Andrei just chuckled, put his beer on the table and said, it's about 15 kilometers outside of Bucharest, located in the middle of a forest. If I think about it, we lived our whole lives here, but never thought about going there. What do you guys think? Should we go there after we finish the beers? My first thought was not to go into a forest outside of Bucharest with some guys that I just met 2 hours ago. But after a bit of consideration, these guys looked nice and harmless, and I didn't feel any threat around them. Plus, I always wanted to visit a haunted place. Well, let's do it, I said firmly, the alcohol starting to kick in by this moment. Should we call an Uber, or how do we get there? Let's pay the bill and call for an Uber. We paid for the beers, went outside while Bogdan was on the Uber app, trying to set the destination point to the Witch's Pond close as possible. He had to do it manually since there was no exact address. The Uber will be here in 3 minutes, guys. I requested for 2 cars since it's 6 of us, Bogdan said. It was dark, and I felt so excited for what I was going to do. My whole life was just playing, work, home, occasional nights out. But for the first time in my life, I was going to do something like this. Something I always wanted. I could feel the adrenaline rushing through my body. The cars arrived and I got into a car with Andrei and Angelo, while Bogdan, Mihai, and Dan got into the second car. The Uber driver looked a bit suspicious, and even with fear, when he saw the destination point. And while noticing this, Andrei assured him we're only some drunk guys trying to have some fun, and also visit the said haunted place, and that he doesn't need to worry about it. We arrived after 20 minutes and got out of the car. It was pitch black, and the headlights were the only source of light out there. The second car arrived about 1 minute later, being delayed due to catching a red light behind us. We all gathered together and turned on the flashlights of our phone. Mihai then said, we should enter the forest from the other side of the road and walk straight for 2 minutes. Then we should reach the Witch's Pond. At least that's what it says on Google. It was cold outside, and a very deep silence, the type of silence that doesn't feel right. Mihai went first. We followed. We climbed a small cliff and entered the forest. We made our way to the Witch's Pond, walking over dead branches, and the leaves brought a bit of sound in the silence that we were surrounded of. After about 1 minute of walking through the forest, the wind started to blow, and all of a sudden, Mihai starts screaming, "Holy fuck, guys. Stop. It's a dead deer over here." A strong rotten smell hit me. I wanted to puke. The wind was now blowing the smell right towards us. We bypassed it holding our breath, and while I got next to it, I took a glance at the deer. Something was off. It didn't look like she died from an animal attack or being shot by some hunter. It had no visible wounds. And even though it smelled so bad, it didn't look like it was in the decomposing stage yet. I got down to my knees and saw her eyes, wide open, and marks of blood pouring out from her eyes. I put my hand on her neck, and that's what shocked me. It was still warm. Her whole body was still warm. I couldn't understand why there was already the smell present, if the deer had just died. I thought it should be another dead body around, and that the smell was not coming from this deer, so I took a breath of air. The previous smell was 10 times stronger now, and I cannot explain what I felt. I can only say that it was the most awful feeling I had ever felt. At the beginning, I felt a very strong wave of fear going through my body. I wanted to leave, but now my legs were weak, and I felt like I couldn't stand up. My vision started to get blurry, and before I knew it, Andre grabbed my arm and helped me to stand up. "What are you still doing here? I had to come back for you. We didn't even notice when you were left behind. How can you stay in the smell?" he asked. "There's something very wrong with this deer," I said. "Even if it smells like it was decomposing for a few days, it just died. I just put my hand on its body and it's still warm." "That's impossible. Your mind is playing tricks. There's no way that her body is still warm. You felt that rotten smell. It has at least 3 days since she died," Andre replied. "Let's go. The boys are waiting for us," he continued. We headed back to the group and kept going. The air started to feel heavy, and the cold was getting colder with how much we advanced towards the pond. We got to a zone where the trees stopped, and we found ourselves in a small, circular area with a pond in the center. The vegetation seemed dead all over the place. The pond had a greenish color, the color of a sick water. The whole place looked so unnatural. I turned off the light of my phone, opened the camera and took a picture of it. It was my first official visit to a haunted place, so I had to have a memory of it. "Alright then, there's no witches here," Angelo said. "Mihai, take a picture of me in front of the lake." Angelo headed towards the lake and turned his back towards it. "You're too close. Go a bit more near the lake," Mihai said. Angelo took a few steps behind, and he ended up stepping, I assume, on a moist piece of mud. That it scared him that he jumped a few steps behind and landed in the water. Now my feet are not only muddy, but also wet. Angelo had a mad expression on his face while getting out of the pond, shaking his feet which were pouring out water. "And by the look of that water, you're gonna stink as well. All I know is that I'm not sharing the Uber with you on the way back," I said, semi-chuckling. By that time, he didn't even want to take the photo anymore, and he came back to us. Dan, being amused by the whole situation, said, "Why don't we sing something? In case there are some nearby animals, we'll scare them and leave the area." I nodded. It felt like a good idea to keep us safe from any stray dogs, or possibly even a wolf. "Yeah, that's a good idea. We could do that for a minute, then go back to the main road and call for a cab," I said. "I don't know any Romanian songs, but I can be the judge to see who's the best singer." The guys agreed on the song, and they all started singing all at once. They were a terrible bunch of untalented drunk guys singing, and it was hilarious. I listened carefully, holding on to my promise and nominate one winner, when all of a sudden, I started hearing a great singing voice. The voice was pure. It was music to my ears. And that's when it hit me. It was a girl's voice. A few seconds later, my new friends heard it too, and they stopped singing as they noticed. It was starting now to accelerate and change the tone from a sweet one to an angry and fast-paced flow. And it seemed like it was coming from all around us. Then, the forest was hit by a hard wind, waving all the trees, and the voice was starting to sound louder and louder. The song now was changed to what sounded like a Latin language, if anything, like an incantation. The bushes around us started to move more. The leaves were flying in the wind. The wind was blowing so hard now, but the voice was still clear as before. That's when Angelo fell on his knees, with the head against his chest, and started shouting, "Nex adum immortales libres poneo nex alvio cananum aberto pirium contio sanus es pracumanus." A strong smell of rot appeared, just like the one I sensed on the deer, and it smelled like it was coming from him. The voice now started to shout the same thing as Angelo, and I needed no invitation to get the fuck out of there. I ran as fast as I could, in the same direction that I thought we came from, barely seeing in front of me and hoping that I wouldn't run into a tree. The guys followed as I heard them running and screaming behind me. A feeling of cold and a deep sleepiness took over me, but I had to fight it, to remain focused and get the fuck out of that forest as fast as possible. The voice was still everywhere, as loud as before, but the wind started to blow even more. I was practically running as fast as my body could, and I was jumping over dead tree trunks, looking left and right to see if there's anything in the woods. But there was nothing that can be seen at least. I saw in front of me about 50 meters or so, the tree line ending, and I knew I headed the right way, and I'm almost out. I looked behind me and saw Mihai around 5 meters behind me, and Dan and Bogdan around 30 meters behind us, still running towards us. "We're almost out," I screamed to the boys. A very loud crack sounded in front of us. The sound scared me and I tripped. I got back up a few seconds and kept running. That's when the big tree fell in front of me and just missed me by a few meters. It was an old tree, at least 300 years old, and it just broke in half. By this moment, Dan and Bogdan got to us, and we continued to run. We're practically seeing the road by now. A few more seconds passed and we left the woods, reaching the main road. The voice was gone by now, and the wind was not blowing any longer. The air started to feel normal as well. I sat down on the road, breathing real heavy. I looked at the guys. Everyone was terrified. No one could say anything. Mihai took out his phone, opened the cab app, enabled his location, and got us a car. We sat in silence waiting, and after about 20 minutes the cab finally got there. We went inside and sat quietly the whole ride. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. I just didn't know what to say. When we arrived in town, we headed straight to the police and told them what happened. And we also told them that Angelo was left behind. Of course they didn't believe us, but they went to investigate. On the second day, I saw it on the news. 23-year-old guy found on the witch's pond. The cause of death, a heart attack. That's when my phone rang. It was Kevin. I answered. "Hey Kev, I just landed here. I'm waiting for a cab to get me to the hotel. Can you send me the address again? I somehow lost it. I'll send you a shared location right away, Kev. By the way, I almost forgot. The phone exploded with static. I looked at my screen, and it now showed a phone number that I didn't recognize. After a few seconds of static, I heard a very low voice, but I couldn't understand anything. I put my phone on speaker mode and pressed the volume up to the max. When I heard it, I froze. It said, "Next adum immortales libres poneo next avio canal num aberto opinion contio samus es pracumanus." I have talked about my road trip on here before. I took the first vacation of my life last year. A rebuilt Yamaha and a foolish sense of optimism carried me across the western United States. Being adventurous seriously made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world. I love Seattle with the hip original hippie neighborhoods and the carnival atmosphere of Pike Place Market. Getting out of Seattle was a total nightmare. Restricted to back roads by a motor that capped at 40 miles an hour, I must have gotten lost a dozen times, despite all the help I received from baffled gas station attendants. So I was behind schedule when it came to finding my campsite. Some miles south and a little east of the city, there's a free campground. It's most often used by horse riders. And boy, can you smell it. That's actually what guided me in the last few miles. There's a gravel road off the service road, and then a few crooked unpaved roads off of that. The trail markers were all bent, broken, or faded. In the end, I had to follow my nose. I set up my junior scout tent in the fading twilight. Mine was the only one there. I had the place all to myself. After a quick meal of apples from a previous campground, I did my travel log on my video camera before turning in for the night. I'm not sure how long I slept. I know I checked the time, but I can't recall what it was. Something had disturbed my well-earned beauty rest, but I was too groggy to remember what it was. That's when I sat up, too alert to fall back asleep, but too sleepy to be totally awake. That's when something brushed the side of my tent, and suddenly, I was more awake now than I had ever been. I had done plenty of camping by that point. I was familiar with the sounds of the nighttime critters, from raccoons to coyotes. Nothing had ever bothered me in my tent before, just snuffle around camp before wandering off and leaving me be. From the sound of the footsteps, it was walking on two legs. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion: a bear. There's a lot of conflicting information out there about how to deal with bears, and a lot of it depends on the type of bear. Sitting there in the dark with my heart beating in my throat, I had no way of telling what kind I was dealing with. Should I shout out or play dead? I was about 30 yards from a sturdy cement block outhouse that might be better shelter. As quietly as I dared, I slipped my boots on and got ready to dash. The zipper of the tent seemed impossibly loud in the night as I worked it slowly and slowly. After getting it to be fully open, I slowly went outside. Once outside, I craned my neck around to see if the bear, if that's what it was between me and the outhouse. With the incredible illumination of the Milky Way, I could see the campground clearly all the way to the tree line. There was nothing out there. However, I had this feeling that something was watching me. It was like feeling an insect crawl along the back of my neck. There was no logical way for me to know that something had its eyes on me out there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, all alone. I couldn't dismiss it. Still on high alert, I crept along and tried not to crunch the gravel under my feet too loud. The outhouse was still my best bet. The door was propped open by a stone, but inside there was a heavy-duty bolt lock. I would have to spend the night surrounded by the smell of not only horse, but also human poop. But I figured that was a fair trade for not getting killed or eaten. My hand was on the latch when I heard the awful crunch of footsteps and gravel behind me. I kicked the stone propping the door open out of the way and slammed the heavy metal door shut, no longer caring how much noise I made. Whatever was on the other side had fingers. Something tugged on the door as I struggled to bolt it shut. I won, but it was close. There was a metal mesh along the top of the outhouse for ventilation. Through the top, I could hear the heavy breathing that matched my own. My phone was back in my tent because I'm an idiot. There was no way to tell time. That's when the same stupid impulse that brought me out there in the first place kicked in. I had to know. Hello? Silence. Maybe this person didn't hear me. But then, hello? I could have shit myself. I was in the right place for it. The voice sounded like my own, and the sound of it was a kick to the gut. I couldn't even tell you why it made me so uneasy. The sensation was like when you're walking upstairs and you're expecting another step, but your foot comes down on an empty space. I'm sorry. I thought I was alone, I said. I am alone. Every syllable was off. Hey, I'm sorry, I freaked out. I didn't think there was anyone else out here. Sorry, I'm here. You would think that if I knew it was another camper, I would have opened the door, but I never did. Some deeply buried instinct kept me from taking my hand off the bolt. Hey, you scared the crap out of me. Are there more tent sites out in the trees or something? I am something. There are more. The words made me sick to my stomach. Again, I couldn't have even told you why, only that they did. And from its odd speech, I guess English wasn't his first language. Do you need to go? Use the bathroom, I mean? Because I'm going to be in here for a while. That wasn't a lie. I wouldn't even open the door if it was my own mother on the other side. You need to go. Its English was improving with every sentence. There was something weird about that. Hey, look, I'm sorry if I scared you, but you started it by creeping around in the dark. I'm not gonna come out. Can you go somewhere else? I'll be gone in the morning, I promise. I just wanted to sleep in peace.
You need to be gone. I promise you, I creep in the dark. You won't be here in the morning.
Fear closed my mouth shut. The more I spoke, the more he did, and I didn't want to hear his voice anymore. I'm sure that made me sound like a bigot or something, but I had the feeling I was feeding words to him, and the feeling was not pleasant. It felt like he was hungry for them. The same instinct that told me to keep quiet the first time kept me from running my dumb mouth off again. I was dealing with someone who was not mentally well, or was something else. The way he was speaking, and the way his words were coming out, and the tone and voice, there was no doubt that he was going to carry out what he was saying. I kept my hands on the boat, while they cramped on the first rays of sun, crept through the mesh at the top of the walls of my shelter. It wasn't until the sun was strong enough to make me sweat in my self-imposed prison that I felt brave, stupid, enough to speak again. Hey, are you still out there? Hello? Anyone? There was no answer, which was the best outcome I could hope for. I opened the door. My tent was untouched, at least from a distance. The oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. I dressed and broke down camp in record time. My moped cranked to life, but it wasn't until I went to put my helmet on that I saw the footprint. I had kicked that rock pretty far. It was close to my bike. Naturally, I went over to it. I had to know. In a clear outline of fresh mud, there was a single print on the smooth gray of the stone. Not human, but a hoof like that of a horse or goat. It was so fresh, so vivid. It hadn't been there last night when I used the bathroom before I gone to bed, and the soft mud in front of the outhouse door were more of the same. Some of them on top of my own boot prints. If you want to go looking for whatever the hell it was, be my guest. Just be careful with your words out there, because I figured out what was wrong with that voice when I watched the playback of my travel log video. It was my own. I am Navajo. We had an incident with an unwelcome visitor in our home. Here's what happened. My cousin is sleeping over. He's the same age as me. We're both 13 at this time. We're in my room, talking and hanging out. It is around maybe 11 p.m. It is a pleasant summer evening, so my window is wide open. It's also pretty dark outside, and my dad is in the living room watching TV. But as always, he's dozed off on the couch. My mom has already gone to bed. My cousin and I are keeping it down, but we're not ready yet to call it a night. All of a sudden, we hear the screen door to the front of the house open and slam shut. We think it's my dad. My mom, she tells us the next day she hears footsteps on the carpet. Whoever it is, she says, goes through her room and towards the bathroom, so she naturally assumes it's my dad. Then she realizes that she's unable to move, as if she's paralyzed. Still, in my room, my cousin and I again hear the screen door open and slam, only this time more loud. It wakes up my dad, and he comes to my bedroom to check on us. Finding us both there, he wants to know which one of my friends just slipped out of the house. It takes a few minutes, but we convince him we were by ourselves, and that we thought it was him going in and out. I can see by the look on his face, he's not really buying it, but he has to admit we don't seem to be lying. He then leaves, and as he's closing the door to my room, he tells us to stay out of trouble and go to sleep. All we could do is shrug. The next morning, my mom tells us about what she heard and how she could not move. She also tells us that the second time the door slams, she then hears what sounds like a horse galloping by her bedroom window. She then has all of us pray, and now, every year, we hike up the mountain to a high point and we pray for protection from evil. This event happened just south of Polaca, Arizona, within the Navajo reservation. A pair of skinwalkers, they say an old couple that lived deep back in the reservation, were seen lurking around this small cattle ranch. 2 heifers had disappeared recently, one of which was discovered down by the creek and mutilated. The man who owned the ranch, his 2 sons, and his brother armed themselves and went out to try to run them off. One of the sons, not yet 18 years of age, was searching out beyond the barn when a dark shape, materializing from the darkness itself, loomed up in front of him, almost nose to nose. As the boy attempted to raise his rifle, the figure raised its hands up to its face as if it was going to yell something. The boy, trying not to look at it in the eyes, then felt something rush into his face, like dust or sand. Even though he tried not to, he ended up taking a breath, and some of it was inhaled in. Immediately, things went dark, and he started experiencing hallucinations. The others found him only minutes later, on his knees, holding the sides of his head, and his eyes rolled back. He fell to the ground and went into some sort of trance. His body limp, and he became unresponsive. They carried him back to the house, and they summoned the local medicine man, who came and said some prayers over him, but he told the others there was nothing to be done but to wait for the dust, traces of which were still on his face and his shirt, to wear off. He promised he would come back the next day when the sun was up and bless the Hogan. Later, after he had regained consciousness, the boy swore to the others that he was the victim of a dog-faced creature. He described it as not quite as tall as he is, thin and scraggly, with patches of mangy and dark hair, a canine snout only shorter than a dog's, and with the smell of rotten eggs or worse. He said he doesn't recall anything more before passing out, other than not being able to breathe and having no control over his own body. I'm writing this to warn you, or to educate you. I haven't decided yet, but you need to understand something. I don't know what I saw, but I do know that I never want to see it again. And I'm warning you, don't go out looking for it. I live and go to college in a small mountain town in Colorado, but often go home to see family, as most of them live in Texas. And I'm actually attached to visiting my cat. Now, in order to get home, I have to make most of my drive through New Mexico, through Santa Fe, and about 160 miles through the desert, which, if you aren't familiar with, don't try to get acquainted with it. Or if you're planning to go out there, I hope this story will change your mind. On this drive, I had 3 other people with me. My younger sister Andrea, and 2 friends from school, Jess and Katie. It was our spring break, and instead of buying stupid price plane tickets, we decided to pile into my little Mercury vehicle and book it back to Texas. Unfortunately, we left the valley a little later than we were supposed to because someone, which was actually me, was forgetting their wallet. So by the time we hit the stretch of desert, it was close to 1 a.m. It had been raining since before we headed through Santa Fe. Not super heavy, but heavy enough. It was 65 degrees. I do remember that because it had been in negatives for quite a while because of where I go to school. So I was pleased to see something over 5 degrees. For this next part of the story, I need you to understand something. I hadn't been driving that long. I was actually awake. I didn't hallucinate, and I damn sure wasn't the only one who saw it. So please, believe me. We passed a white Prius. As he was driving away, I looked in my rear view mirror and saw something crossing the road, caught in the red glow of the taillights. It was walking with a horrible limp and dragging itself across the road on 2 legs. The motions were unnatural, even jerky. I slammed on my brakes, thinking someone had driven off the road and was stuck or injured. I slid to a stop about 20 feet away from it. The Prius had stopped as well, seeing the person in the road. I opened my door and stuck my head out in the rain to get a better view. It wasn't human. It stopped. The figure was illuminated by the taillights of both of our vehicles. It had to have been at least 7 feet tall, possibly 8. The skin was stretched like a too small shirt, cracking, hanging off its frame in long bloody ribbons. The jaw was almost totally unhinged from its face, the cheekbones disgusting. The skin on the scalp was thin, and spots of bloody white stuck out. And the smell, I had never smelled anything like it. As soon as I opened the door, it hit me. Rotting flesh, meat that has been left out for months, rotten milk, the kind of stuff nightmares are made of. The Prius took off, squealing its tires into the night. But I stayed. Fight or flight hadn't kicked in yet for me. This thing couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. It slowly turned its head, each vertebrae in the neck individually cracking like fucking bubble wrap. We made eye contact, but it had no eyes, only darkness. I slammed my car door shut and sped off. At this point, my friends all woke up and saw it too. Katie was in the back and hysterical. Jess was silent, her mouth set into a grin. Andrea just sat with a look of fear, tears silently streaming down her face. My friend kept screaming, "What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that, Alex?" I didn't know what to tell her. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel as we broke 80. Then something happened that I still, to this day, cannot explain. The temperature dropped during the whole event. It was 30 degrees out. It had been 65 no more than 5 minutes ago. It then began to snow, heavy, wet snow. We ended up pulling over at a gas station called Klein's Corner. No one moved. Andrea was crying, and Jess was praying. Kate was cursing and I was shaking. "What the fuck just happened?" Kate said, all color drained from her face. I looked at her, my face with fear. "I don't know. I don't want to know, but we need to leave." I slowly put the car into drive and continued our trip. I don't remember the rest of the drive. All I know is that everything else was fine. We reached Texas by 6 a.m. Nothing else happened. I'm not sure what it was. The closest I could come to was a skinwalker. Maybe it was a shapeshifter that had a bad change. I really don't know. Please believe me when I tell you this. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. Don't go looking for it. Don't follow it, because it might end up following you back. My older sister, who is Irish, Italian, recently got married. Not her first, to this guy who is Navajo. Shortly after they settled down together, she has a boy from her first marriage. They invite me to hang out with them down on the reservation, where her new husband has a house and some property. I ended up bringing a few friends. Being a white guy, I know nothing about native or skinwalker lore. One of the friends that comes along, Gregory, however, is into horror and demons, things like that, and knows all these different werewolf, vampire, and even skinwalker stories. That first night, with not much else to do, we are out in the middle of a few 100,000 acres of hills and wooded land. We end up sitting around a small bonfire, with him telling us one story after the next. The next day we all take a walk to the elementary school to bring my nephew home. My sister usually picks him up, but she has some errands to run. Along the way we pass this scraggly looking dude sitting beneath this tree beside the road. He looks kind of old, but in a way that is difficult to say just how old. Regardless, it's definitely creepy the way he's watching us. His eyes kind of flat and dull, as if unaffected by the sunlight. As we make our way back from the school, my nephew seems pretty quiet and shy. When he sees this guy, he ducks behind me and starts tugging on my shirt. I ask him what's up, and without taking his eyes off the guy, he whispers, "I don't like that man. He's bad." The way he said it gives me chills, but I really don't think all that much more about it. Well, that night, Gregory and my other two friends, Jeff and Sarah, and I all head out to go check out this abandoned part of the reservation, which supposedly is haunted. We had been warned not to by my brother-in-law. He says it is an inhabited place of ghosts of the past and some kind of dark being. Of course, that only serves to make us want to go even more. So we dismiss his warnings and ghost stories, take the keys to my sister's SUV, and off we go. When we first get there, I have to admit, it is a lot spookier looking and feeling than any one of us had expected, consisting of only a handful of abandoned structures, most of the faded and grain wood, and the biggest of which is only 2 stories. It looks to me to have been some sort of mining town, like the kind that you see on westerns on TV. Anyways, just about every window is completely busted out, with only a shared appointed pane hanging here and there. There isn't a single door still in place, and definitely not an item of any value anywhere to be seen. In fact, there isn't much of anything at all. As we walk around, going up to and looking into some of the places, but not entering, Jeff takes us to telling us how this reminds him of one of his past flings with some girl. Sarah and I roll our eyes, as we always do when he starts waxing old memories and then goes off a little ways, leaving him and Gregory together. We find a cozy corner out of sight and start getting comfortable, if you know what I mean. We are going at it for all 5 seconds when we both notice it has suddenly turned chill. Just as we huddle together for warmness, we hear a blood-curdling scream. We jump up and run back into the direction of the SUV and where we last saw Gregory and Jeff. There, they are facing the remains of the storefront, their eyes staring straight ahead and oblivious to the fact that we are there. Sarah and I both look to where they are staring, and we see this creature, that it is a wolf-like creature, but yet not being a wolf completely. I'm still not sure to this day if it was real or not. Either way, I for one am scared, as I have never been in my life. Its body is fully covered in hair, and it had these long wraith-like fingers, which end in thick curled nails, definitely claw-like. Its head is the worst though. Its eyes are just these 2 chunks of dark coal, flat, and emotionless. Its mouth is full of small daggers. I'm not sure how long we stand there frozen. Finally, it takes a step forward, and as if released from some spell, we bolt to the truck. Jeff and I jump into the front seat, he to the driver's side, and me in the passenger, while Gregory and Sarah go for the back. Jeff doesn't have his license, but at that point no one's arguing. The keys are in the ignition. He starts the SUV, floors the gas, and we speed off gravel and sand flying everywhere. I look out the window on my side, and then all around. I see nothing through the cloud of dust and the darkening twilight. When I turn to look back at Gregory, the only thing he could think to say is, "You got some lipstick on your chin." Just down the road some, Jeff slows the truck. By this time we are all laughing and making fun of each other for running away from shadows. Just then, a look of fright comes over Sarah's face, and without saying a word, she points a trembling finger out towards the trees along the side of the road. There, back in the dark of the trees, is where we see the shadow-like figure running just inside the tree line, as if it's keeping pace with us, and we all yell in unison to Jeff, and he again presses down on the gas. The SUV springs into life, but that thing, whatever it is, stays with us every inch of the way. It is only when we see the lights to my sister's porch that, making the turn off to her. When we pull up to the house, my brother-in-law is out on the porch with this guy dressed in a long-sleeve button white shirt, blue jeans, and work boots. He later introduces himself as the local shaman. When we get up to the porch, the guy is in the middle of some kind of blessing. When he finishes, my brother-in-law simply turns to us and says, "Now you know, maybe next time you'll listen." Later, after the shaman leaves, he admonishes us, saying that by telling the Skinwalker stories, we put everyone out there in danger. He said just mentioning them can make them come and seek you out. Jacob cursed as he pushed through the thick underbrush, trying to make his way to the tree stand he had built earlier in the summer. He was for sure that this location would give him a good sight to the neighboring field, in which he frequently saw large herds of deer. This was going to be his year, and he was sure of it. "This is the year that I bring home my trophy buck," he told himself, as he recalled the events of the day so far. He had awakened at 4:30 a.m. He began to get ready for the long day in the woods, on the backside of his farm. His first order of business had been to locate and rescue his gloves and camouflage hunting gear from whatever undisclosed area of his home that his wife had hidden them. He was gonna need them this morning to protect him from the bitter cold November morning. How could it be this cold, this early in the year? He wondered as he started to work on his second task of the day, which was to make a breakfast that would stick to his ribs long into the day. But he finally settled on toast, country ham, and scrambled eggs. He topped it all off with a large cup of coffee that had left a bitter aftertaste in his mouth. In fact, he could still taste it. After this, he packed himself a cheese sandwich for lunch. He grabbed his Remington hunting rifle, some coffee, and headed out the door. He loaded his gear into his truck and pulled out of the driveway and turned right into the one-lane blacktop road that led to the backside of his property. After about 2.25 miles, he turned right again. He had to travel about half a mile down that pitiful rut-filled excuse for a road when he came to his desired location. He then got out of his truck and loaded his gun and walked off into the woods. 10 minutes out of the truck and he was already cold. and it was made worse by the cloudy, overcast day, and the wind that was blowing through the trees, making all the leaves rattle like dry bones. Oh well, he thought, it's gonna be a good day anyway, especially if I bring home a big one. Jacob took about 10 more steps when an uneasy feeling began to creep over him. He felt as though someone had stepped over his grave. He got the distinct feeling that he was being watched, but by whom? This was, after all, his property, and it was posted. No one had permission to be on his land. He had to be alone, but if he was alone, why couldn't he shake this eerie feeling that was scratching at the base of his skull? Something was off today. There was a silence in the forest. No birds, no insects, only the sound of the wind in the trees. Convincing himself that it was nothing more than a case of nerves, he continued to press on until he came to a clearing, not too far from his tree stand. Stepping into the clearing, Jacob saw the remains of what appeared to be a large deer, but he wasn't quite able to make out what he was seeing from this distance because the sun wasn't completely up yet, and the forest was still covered in shadows. Jacob then walked closer to get a better look, and found that he had been correct. It was a deer, a large 8-point buck in fact. Looking at the remains, he felt a sense of dread come over him, and icy fingers dance along his spine. Something about this kill just didn't seem right. The throat was completely torn out, and the stomach was ripped open. Plus, also several of the internal organs were missing. This definitely wasn't a coyote kill, and no hunter would have done this. They would have taken the head to have it mounted. What could have done this, he wondered. A fear like nothing he had ever experienced before began to wash over him in waves. What is going on? He thought. At nearly 225 pounds, and well over 6 foot, he wasn't one to give in to fear, but now he couldn't seem to calm down, and his heart was beating like a trip hammer. That feeling that he was being watched was getting stronger by the minute, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was moments away from a bad situation. He slowly started to back away from the mangled body and head back to his truck and back to safety. No more than 6 steps into his journey, his blood turned to ice in his veins as a deep, guttural scream shattered the eerie silence and what was left of his courage. He had grown up on the farm all of his life and had been an experienced hunter since he was a child. He was familiar with every animal in the part of the state. Fear now gave way to stark terror as he chambered around into his Remington rifle and turned around only to find there was nothing behind him. His mind raced with confusion, and he was confronted with a million thoughts at once. What should I do? What could it be? Should I run? Am I gonna die? His survival sense kicking into overdrive. Jacob decided to continue on his previously contrived plan, which was to get to the truck and get out of there. Slowly and cautiously, he made his way toward the perceived salvation of his vehicle, silently praying every step of the way. With 300 yards separating him from his only avenue of escape, Jacob began to hear heavy footfalls off to his left. He could hear the crunching of withered leaves, sticks, and debris that littered the forest floor. Summoning every ounce of courage that remained within him, he forced himself to look in the direction of the noise. And that is when he saw the dark silhouette that followed him through the forest. Quickening his pace, he redoubled his efforts to reach the truck and get to a phone and call the sheriff, the game warden, or anyone that would listen. He couldn't tell what it was that was stalking him, but he could clearly see that it towered more than 7 feet. and was incredibly massive. Jacob couldn't help but think that he was about to become a national statistic, a person who left home under normal circumstances and just disappeared without a trace. How many people, he wondered, go into the woods and just vanish, and the authorities just assume that they have become lost, injured, or been the victims of animal attacks, with their bodies never recovered. Please God, don't let that happen to me, he told himself as he drew closer and closer to his truck. 75 yards became 50, and 50 became 30, and 30 became 10. And like a miracle, he was back and opening his door. Throwing his rifle inside, he pulled himself up into the cab and started the engine and hit the gas. But the truck went nowhere. He had parked in a puddle of mud, and now the tires simply spun in place. Not now, he thought. I can't be stuck. Allowing himself a moment to think, Jacob remembered, this truck is a four-wheel drive. There is no way I can be stuck, and was ready to punch the gas and leave this nightmare behind. Unfortunately for Jacob, some nightmares are not so easily left behind, and there is nothing worse than a nightmare you can't wake up from. And Jacob was about to learn that the hard way. Hearing something to his right, he turned and immediately wished that he had not. It took him maybe half a second to turn his head, but he would have given anything in the world to have that half second back, because it was the last moment that his world would ever see normal again. In that split second, his world changed. It was no longer a place where the world was light and safe, where he was just a husband and a dad and a guy that liked to go hunting and watch football on the weekends. That reality had evaporated away, and all that was left was a world where monsters existed and things really do go bump in the night. And now, an ambassador from that nightmare realm was standing just outside his passenger door, a visible reminder that his world had been turned upside down. Jacob screamed as he stared transfixed on this escapee from a horror movie. In his most terrifying, fevered dream, he couldn't have imagined that such a thing could exist. It was hideously ugly, easily standing 8 feet tall, with a thick, muscular body. There was just something about that face that was just wrong, almost like a mixture of a man and an animal experiment that had gone horribly wrong. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. It was completely covered with thick, shaggy black hair that was matted in areas with God only knows what, and it walked on 2 legs, not on 4 legs, like you would expect from some kind of animal. What was this thing that had shattered his perception of reality? Was it a demon? Was it a werewolf? It can't be, he thought. Those things don't exist. But whatever it was staring at him, and it didn't look happy. The menacing juggernaut threw its enormous head back and let out a blood-curdling scream that resonated throughout the surrounding area and seemed to vibrate him to his very core. Shocked back into action, Jacob threw his truck into gear and took off as though he was being chased by the very hounds of hell. Jacob, with his mind racing, wondered what he was gonna do. How will I ever feel safe on this farm again, he thought. Are my wife and children in danger? What and where did this thing come from? And will anyone believe me? The whirlwind of thoughts that swirled through Jacob's mind came to an immediate stop as he slammed on his brakes and nearly slid off the road. In a state of disbelief, Jacob sat staring at the large hackberry tree that laid across the dirt road and blocked his path, preventing him from reaching the black top and guarantee safety. How is this even possible, he thought. I just came down this road not even 30 minutes ago, and this path was clear. It was painfully obvious to Jacob that he had to get that tree moved if he was going to make it back home. Since he didn't have a chain to pull the tree out of the road, nor did he have a saw with which he could cut up the unexpected barricade. He was left with a few options, one of which was walking, which he discounted immediately. The most logical course of action that he could come up with was to call for help. His best friend Kenny Patterson owned the farm just over from his. If he were home, he could bring a saw and cut the tree up for him. Jacob, with his nerves still frazzled and frayed, reached into his glove box and pulled out his cell phone and dialed Kenny's number. The phone rang 6 times, and Jacob was about to give up when Kenny answered the phone and said, "Hey ugly, what do you want this early in the morning?" As quickly as he could, he told the recent events to Kenny and said, "Please, hurry, I'm not kidding, there is something out here." Kenny, hearing the shakiness in his friend's voice, assured him that he would be there in a matter of minutes. Jacob thanked him and hanged up the phone, and braced himself for what he was sure would be the longest few minutes of his life. Sitting motionless inside of his truck, every sound made his imagination run wild with fear. Even though little more than 3 minutes had passed since he had spoken to Kenny, it felt as if hours had passed. The clock seemed to be an eternity. Jacob frequently checked in all directions for any sign to see if this nightmarish monstrosity had pursued them. In every shadow that the forest and on this cloudy day produced, he thought he saw the shape of the black beast that had followed him out of the woods, and he was afraid that he would lose himself long before Kenny arrived to clear the tree out of his path. After what seemed like a lifetime, Jacob heard the sound of Kenny's old truck sputtering up the road, and in just moments, he was able to see the old red Chevy as it made its way closer to him. Jacob's spirits lifted when he saw his old friend, and a sense of relief washed over him as he realized that he was no longer alone. Stepping out of his truck, Jacob said, "Man, what took you so long? I told you to hurry." Kenny, with a surprised look on his face, "What are you talking about? You only called me 11 minutes ago. I think I made pretty good time." Jacob could hardly believe that only 11 minutes had passed. It had seemed so much longer. After apologizing to his friend and telling him exactly how happy he was to see him, both men walked over to the fallen tree and made a discovery that startled them both. The tree had not broken. It had not been cut. It had been pushed over and completely uprooted. All around the tree were large bipedal footprints that had a somewhat human appearance to them. But if they were human, the owner would require a size 28 shoe. Jacob and Kenny looked at each other, and then without a word, went to work on the tree. Kenny took a chainsaw from the bed of his truck and began to cut up the fallen blockade. Meanwhile, Jacob pulled the logs and debris from the road. Mission accomplished. Kenny put away his saw, and he and Jacob were about to get in their vehicles and leave. But before they could even open their doors, an ear-splitting scream erupted from the woods behind them. Jacob walked over to Kenny and whispered, "That's what I was telling you about. I don't know what that thing is, man, but it looks like some kind of monster, and I think we need to get out of here, now." Kenny looked as though the blood had drained completely out of his face, became very pale, as he said to Jacob, "Jacob, man, I never mentioned this to anyone before now, but over the last few months, that thing has been killing off a few of my cows. Their throats are usually torn out, and the bodies are mangled and broken. I didn't want anyone to accuse me of being crazy and making stuff up, so I never said anything about it. But that's the reason I rushed over here when you called. I actually heard that sound a few times off in the distance at night, but never this close. So I think you are right, old buddy. It's time to go." Cautiously and with a sense of urgency, Jacob and Kenny climbed into their vehicles and made their way back into the blacktop. Both vehicles then began the 2.5 mile trek that led back to Jacob's house so they could decide what course of action should be taken. Jacob could feel the temperature drop as snow began to gently fall. He then reached over and turned his wipers on as snow began to pelt the windshield harder. As he passed his neighbor, William Springer's farm, he noticed a herd of deer grazing in the field that bordered his own property. Having put a distance between himself and the nightmare he had just encountered, Jacob felt a renewed sense of security as his fatigued nerves began to calm down. Not willing to let this opportunity pass him by, Jacob turned on his hazard lights and pulled to the shoulder of the road and signaled Kenny to do the same. Kenny knew what Jacob was thinking as he pulled in behind him and turned his ignition off. Getting out of his truck, Kenny said, "What are you doing, man? We need to get out of here now." Jacob said, "I know, and we will. In just a minute, man. I just can't turn this down. I have to take the shot. That's a 6-point buck standing there. It's not the trophy that I wanted, but at least I won't end up going home empty-handed. And after what happened this morning, I think I deserve a little something good. Alright, just take the shot so we can go. I still don't feel right about this," Kenny said. Jacob steadied his rifle across the hood of his truck. He zeroed in on the buck and was getting ready to fire. That's when he heard Kenny make a gasping noise and whisper, "Oh my God, what is it, man? What's wrong with you?" "Raise your scope 3 inches, he said. Raising the scope, Jacob immediately saw what had been the cause of Kenny's alarm. Standing just outside the tree line in the edge of the field was the creature that they had left behind. Not even 5 minutes. Was this thing following them? Was it after the deer? What was it doing? Jacob watched the creature through his scope for a full 30 seconds before it even moved, and when it did, it ignored him and the deer and started to walk towards William's barn that was just about 500 yards from where the woodland demon had been standing. Jacob called out to Kenny and said, "Kenny, call William and tell him that there is something trying to get into his barn. I know he has livestock in there, and if that thing gets in it, it will kill all of them." Attempting to get rid of this monster, werewolf, wendigo, or whatever it was, Jacob fired a shot, but missed. The creature turned towards them and glared at them through red, hate-filled eyes, and then began to run towards them at full steam. Kenny, who was still on the phone with William, screamed at Jacob to get in his truck and go. Jacob did as he was told, and Kenny followed right behind him. Starting their trucks, Jacob and Kenny both raced to Jacob's house as though they were driving on the NASCAR circuit. Arriving at home, Jacob, gun in hand, ran inside to get a phone book so that they could call the game warden and the police and get some kind of animal control out there to get rid of this thing. Jacob had just stepped out of his front porch when they heard gunfire coming from over at William's place. Dropping the phone book and running back inside, Jacob grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun and some shells and handed them to Kenny, who took little time in loading it. Jacob and Kenny, now locked and loaded, walked together to their truck and got ready to mount up a rescue for their neighbor William. Simultaneously, both of them stopped in their tracks as a familiar but uneasy feeling crept over them, and Jacob's 2 German shepherds began to whimper and ran under the front porch to hide. Kenny, whose throat had gone dry as a bone, whispered to Jacob and said, "I have a really bad feeling about this." No sooner had the words escaped his lips, they heard a scream erupt from the forest off to the right, and the creature exploded from the trees in front of them. Until now, neither man had been able to fully appreciate the colossal size and scope of the beast, but standing less than 30 feet away from them, they were almost overcome by the sheer magnitude of it. Jacob had seen it up close earlier from his truck while sitting down, and had guessed the height at maybe 8 feet. But now, standing there, looking up, he could tell that this fellow was 8.5 or 9 feet tall, and would tip the scale at 800 to 1,000 pounds. It had inhuman long arms that were easily seen beneath its long shabby black hair, which covered it from head to toe. The chest was larger than a 55-gallon drum, and there was little doubt that it could have pulled the arms off an ape, and now it stood there, staring at them. Jacob and Kenny both opened fire without hesitation. The creature screamed with rage as the bullets tore into its massive body, knocking it to the ground, but not killing or seriously injuring it. Jacob and Kenny watched speechless as it crawled into the tree line, struggled to its feet, and limped away. Jacob ran back to the porch and grabbed the phone book and called the local game warden. Nearly 2 hours later, Gene, the local warden, showed up to take their statements and told them that he had been called out to answer numerous such reports in the area, but he wasn't sure what to make of all these reports. "Guys," he said, "I don't know what to tell you. There is no animal in this area, or any area for that matter that fits your description. I'm not saying I don't believe you, I just don't know what it is." Jacob, whose face was reddened with anger, said, "Come here. Here's the blood from where we shot it, and here are the footprints." A look of complete confusion washed over Gene's face, and he asked if they would care to go with him as he tried to track it. Jacob and Kenny agreed, but they said they weren't going without a gun. Gene stated that he planned to take his gun as well. All three men loaded their guns and set out following the tracks and droplets of blood that had fallen on the leaves. They followed the trail for about a mile, until arriving at a creek that was located deep in Jacob's woods, where the tracks that they were following were joined by others just like them. Some were smaller, but at least one set was larger. Deciding that the safest course of action would be to return home, they all went back to Jacob's. None of them gave up the idea of staying out in the woods longer, since there was now apparently more than one creature, and the cloudy overcast day made the forest seem even darker than it would normally be this time of day. Back at Jacob's, Gene informed them that there was nothing left that he could do but file it under an unknown animal sighting, which made both Kenny and Jacob anything but happy. Jacob and Kenny spent the next couple of days trying to warn their neighbors to use caution when they were out in the forest. Most of their friends just laughed at them and said they had most likely just seen a bear or something. No one believed them except William, who had also seen it himself the same day they had. He had even taken a shot at it, but missed. Jacob, William, and Kenny knew what they had seen, and they knew it was still out there, and they didn't care who believed them and who didn't. Over the next few weeks, more and more neighbors began to take the story a little more seriously, as family pets began to disappear, and other pets were found mangled. Other farms in the area began to find their cows and other livestock torn open, with their throats ripped out. Just a week after shooting the creature in his yard, Jacob's own German Shepherd was found dead, with its throat torn out, and it was hanging across a limb in a tree in his front yard. It almost seemed like a revenge killing. A few days later, one of William's new animals died the same way. Some people in the area still don't believe. They think the whole story was made up. But Jacob and Kenny know that there is still something out there in the forest. They still occasionally find tracks, or a slaughtered cow or goat. They still hear the blood-curdling screams off into the woods at night. They know that there is still something out there, watching and waiting, biding its time. Something cold and cunning and cruel. Something not human, with a taste for blood and revenge. This is one of the scariest experiences that has ever happened to me. Even simply by writing this, it brings back so many nightmares. And it reminds me as to why I will never go camping again. I had been attending Camp Rock Water for about 4 years now. I used to love camping, being able to see some new faces, getting to do fun and exciting activities. My favorite was the river rope swing. I never wanted to leave that swing once I got on. I was just so excited to go back, mainly because it would be my last year I went. And then summer finally came, and it was finally time to go camping. When I got to camp after a 4-hour car ride, I was so excited. I was remembering all my old favorite places. First things first, my mom had to take me to the lodge to get signed up. When we got into the lodge, there were a lot of people there. We waited in line until it was our turn to sign up. Before we were handed any papers, the lady at the table told us that there had recently been some weird things going on a few miles down through the woods from us. I just brushed it off and ignored it. I think I was just too excited to finally be able to go to camp again. My mom helped me lug my suitcase to the cabin. When we got there, I was so happy to see some old friends from last year. Kyle was one of my longtime camp friends. He was sitting in a corner making his bed. Jacob, another one of my really good friends, was on the floor taking stuff out of his bag. And who could forget about Brad? He was putting stuff in the closet, like baseball bats and golf clubs. As for the other two kids, I had no idea who they were, but they both seemed to like me. It turns out they were brothers. Their names were Brandon and Nathan, and it being their first year here, they were kind of nervous. We all got settled in, and after our parents left, we sat down and started talking about past adventures in camp. It wasn't for another hour that our cabin leader arrived. When he got in, he kind of looked at us all with a gloomy face. He turned to us and said, "Hey guys, I'm your cabin leader for the next 2 weeks. Now, before we do anything, I have to tell you that some things have changed, and we will have to be more cautious due to the weird things that have been happening." We all were a little uneasy, but we wouldn't let that stop us from having the best summer ever. The day continued on as normal. We introduced ourselves, played some cards in our cabin, went outside and played basketball, went to the mess hall to eat, and came back to the cabin to sleep. It was kind of strange that there were only 6 cabins full of people, when there's always around 30. So the next day we woke up. It was raining hard. The sounds of the rain smacking the metal roofs of the cabins echo off to the distance. The camp leader was nowhere to be found. So we kind of sat around the middle of the cabin, just waiting for our cabin leader to get back. We then started talking about some ghost stories that happened around the camp. Some of them seemed completely stupid, but others were kind of scary. And just to let you all know, outside of our cabin, there were about 400 acres of woods. In those woods, there were some obstacle courses, the chapel, and the river. There was one more thing in the woods that nobody really knew about, because it was so far off. It was the original Camp Rock water cabins. There were only a few of the older cabin leaders that knew about it and how to get to them. They say that back in the early 1900s, when the camp was first established, 2 kids got into a fight in their cabins, and one kid killed the other in his sleep. He had apparently taken a heavy rock and dropped it on the other boy's head. Legend has it that the presence of the boy who was killed is seen walking around the old campground and chapel. They say that the boy can sometimes be seen crying at the back of the chapel. Someone even said they went to the cabins and saw his head peeking out from one of the windows. At this point, everyone in our cabin was really scared. I swear, Brad was going to have a panic attack. That's when our camp leader came rushing in through our cabin door. He told us that we needed to pack our things and go to the lodge. We would have to call our parents in the morning to tell them to take us home. We walked all the way from our cabin to the lodge in the rain, completely wet. When we got there, only 4 other cabins had been there. As I was sitting next to the fireplace with my cabin mates, we overheard people talking about what was going on. Someone had said that all of Cabin 6 had gone missing after returning from the chapel. The conversations after that got really boring that we ended up falling asleep in the lodge. Later that night, I woke all of my friends. I wanted to go and check out what happened in the woods. Call me stupid all you want, but mind you, I was also younger. Though at first all of my friends didn't want to go, they still agreed to tag along with me. We grabbed a few flashlights and snuck past the cabin leaders that were sleeping near the exit. When we got outside, it was still raining, but now it was also pitch black outside. This still didn't stop us from heading over to the woods. When our group finally got to the mouth of the woods, Brad and Jake just couldn't do it. They walked back to the lodge through the shortcut in the gardens. All that were left were Kyle, Brandon, Nathan, and I. We walked slowly through the path that leads to the chapel. Every now and then, we would trip over some uprooted trees, but we still kept going. We could see the chapel ahead of us, but we knew there was something wrong. It was very quiet. The rain had stopped too, and there was no wind, nor any kind of animal in sight. As we walked up to the chapel, Brandon, who was carrying one of the flashlights, just started screaming. He then ran as fast as he could back towards camp and dropped his flashlight. The light was shining through the chapel, and I kid you not, through one of the windows, we saw the face of a child crying. That's when we all screamed and started to run towards the camp as well. Out of fear, we lost all sense of direction and had no idea where any of us were. As we came up to the ravine that led down to the river, that's where we saw in the pitch darkness a silhouette of a small black figure that was blocking our way. Our only way out was taking the ravine. Nathan, Kyle, and I began going down the side of the ravine, and we noticed another figure. That's when I shot my flashlight down a ways, and there was Brandon, just lying dead, with his head smashed in, blood everywhere. To be honest though, it seemed like he had tripped maybe on an uprooted tree and fell down the side of the ravine, but we had to just keep running, so we left him there. We were halfway down the ravine when we could feel the sweat falling into our eyes like ocean water, and there it was again, the figure of a little boy standing at the end of the ravine, waiting for us to play with him. I told everyone just to keep running, and that's when I looked behind us, and Nathan had disappeared. He was no longer with us. I'm not sure if he took another way or ended up running a different path or back, but he was completely gone. Kyle and I kept running, and that's when I saw the old stairs coming up to our left that led back up to the back part of camp. When we got to the stairs and we were almost to the top, that's when we could hear a kid saying, "We can play with the rocks." We didn't even stop to look back. We ran all the way to the lodge. When we got there, all of the cabin leaders had been away. 2 other cabins had left to go investigate what was going on in those woods. They both went missing. And then Kyle finally spoke up. Even though he hadn't said anything all night, he did say, "I saw him. The boy just wanted to play with us." And that was it. The next morning, our parents picked all of us up, and we never went back again. Years have passed since that encounter. Kyle was booked into a mental hospital. They said for some serious mental issues that he had going on. Jake and Brad were never found, and nobody ever mentioned anything about them after that day. As for the other 3 cabins of kids, nobody ever found out what happened or where they went. Maybe nobody cares. But I will tell you this though, after this experience, I have never, nor will I ever, go camping again. I try to live my life without too many regrets. I had highs and lows like everyone else in life, sure, but I do what I can to not worry too much about what could have happened if I made a different choice, if I maybe hadn't taken the road less traveled. Everyone makes the best decisions they can with the information they have available to them at the time. Going through all the what ifs is crazy, because the only way you would have made a different choice is if you had some other detail, which of course you didn't. You can never be exactly sure what the sequence of events might have looked like if you gone right instead of left. And yet, there is one choice I made, one road that I took, that I just can't help but wonder how things might have turned out if I had only done something different. My job has me move around pretty often. I'm not going to get into what I do. That has no bearing on the story. But a couple of years ago, I was working in Philadelphia and living on the other side of the Delaware River in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm originally from northwestern Pennsylvania, and this was the closest I had been to home since I moved out of college. So I took the chance to go see my parents whenever I could. I knew I would be moving again before long, and my folks aren't getting any younger. So I try to find a weekend every month or so to make the 7-hour trip to visit them. If I had been thinking about it when I was looking for places to rent, maybe I would have tried to live on the west side of Philadelphia instead of this side in Jersey to avoid the rush hour. But by the time I realized, the lease was signed and there wasn't much I could do. The drive to my hometown was pretty boring. I would take the Ben Franklin Bridge across the river, head up I-476 for an hour or so, then a long slog across basically the entire expanse of Pennsylvania on I-80 before another hour north of I-79. The only thing about the drive was how long it would take me to get through Philly, because once I got on the 476 extension, I could predict my ETA within 5 or 10 minutes. My second summer in Jersey, I had taken 2 weeks off and planned on spending the second week back home. Things changed that first Wednesday though, because a big storm came by and knocked out power in a good part of the area where I was living. Dealing with 90-degree heat with no AC wasn't something I felt like spending the first half of my vacay doing. So after one uncomfortable sweaty night, I let my parents know that I was heading over a few days earlier. I should have left first thing in the morning, but because I had a couple of things to take care of before heading out, by the time I finally got on the road that Thursday, it was past lunchtime and getting on mid-afternoon. For whatever reason, the traffic in Philly was heavy, and by the time I finally got through town, I was a good hour behind schedule. Still, based on my timeline, I figure I'll still be able to make it early enough to grab a dinner and beer with my dad and brother before cashing in for the night. There were two things I hadn't taken into consideration. One was the number of other folks that, apparently, had the same idea to get out of town that I did, and that the road construction must have sprung up in the time since my last trip home. The interstate highway system is a heck of a thing. Being able to zip along at 65-70, or in some remote places like West Texas even faster than that, makes cross-country travel take a fraction of the hours it would otherwise. I can't tell you the number of times my folks always talk about the days before the interstate, when going to see friends outside of DC would take almost twice as long as it does now. What's truly remarkable to me though, is that even though the entire system of highways was built start to finish in a mere 35 years, it sure seems like when parts of it go under construction, they stay that way forever. Traffic was heavy, but moving, and I was making decent time until I saw the first orange warning signs, letting me know that 4 lanes were reducing to 3. and then 2, and then 1. There were hundreds of cones stretched down the road as far as the eye could see. And see, I could, as the cars in front of me reached a complete and total standstill. It was one of the worst deadlocks I had ever been in. Seriously, I think I moved about a mile in about an hour. After about 3 hours, my stomach started grumbling. With an exit just ahead and no end to the traffic jam in sight, I got off and found a diner to grab some dinner. Even if traffic picked up, I still had a solid 5 hours of driving ahead of me. So at that point, I knew for sure it was going to be pretty late that I was getting in. After finishing eating, I got back on the road. Things looked like they were picking up for a couple of miles. But then, I came up to the back end of a jam and was right back to waiting. We were moving a little bit better, I think averaging about 5 miles an hour at this point. But as the sun started edging towards the horizon, I pulled out my phone and started to see if Google could point me in any kind of workaround. It's a funny thing about human nature. Most of us don't like to sit still. Studies at airports show that people would rather walk further to baggage claim to get their luggage, even if the total time would have been less if they had a slightly longer wait at planeside. Well, the power of the internet appeared to be in my favor. Even though I-80 still showed a dark red band for another 50 miles or so, there was a southbound country road coming up a few miles, and a northbound a couple after that. Both of these roads looked like they let me bypass the worst of the traffic. Since I spent the better part of the day sitting on the road, my patience was about worn out, and I opted to take the southbound road. Even though the app told me it would take about 30 minutes longer to get to my parents' house, I just wanted to get moving again, and reasoned that at this rate, it might take me more than a 35-minute difference to get to the northbound. And that is a choice that I will remember until the day I die. I made the turnoff and felt my mood improve. The signs changed, limiting my speed between 35 and 40 miles an hour. But even that seemed like flying compared to the logjam I spent the last several hours in. The drive was interesting. The road was starting to get a little twisty, with plenty of changes, as it curved up and around the hills of central Pennsylvania. It took me on a general southwest road, but turned and doubled back on itself enough that for the first 30 minutes or so, I had views of the stalled traffic on I-80. Pretty soon after that though, just about the time that the sun was just dipping down beneath a couple of hills in my rear view mirror, the road took a long curve and carried me down and away out of sight of the interstate. Now, something that a lot of people don't know is how big of a state Pennsylvania is. There are plenty of bigger ones, but Pennsylvania is really big, and it's also remote, isolated. The translation of the name means Penn's Woods. After all, the Blair Witch Project didn't have to embellish that aspect of the state. The fact that you could head into the woods and walk for dozens of miles in any way without seeing anything like another human being was pretty creepy. It's got a decent number of big cities. Pittsburgh and Philly both have enough of a population to support major sports teams, but away from those centers of development, there's a whole lot of nothing, and trees, and dark, and lonely roads. Such was the road I was traveling that night, winding through the twists and turns of the Appalachian foothills. I moved around a lot. I mentioned I traveled through most of the states anyways. I sometimes used to wonder, when I would be driving along a patch of asphalt, surrounded by only untamed wilderness, what it must have been like to build such a road. What was it like before man had intruded with our civilization and our machines? What used to live there? But I don't wonder anymore. Not ever since that night, when I made a left instead of right. The road continued to twist back and forth, up and down. As I went deeper into the foothills, the trees grew thicker. branches from either side of the road reaching over and almost touching, forming a natural canopy 20 feet up that blocked out much of my view of the sky and the stars above. I drove with my high beams on because the idea of streetlights had never entered the minds of whoever built this road. The painted lines were old and not well cared for. I'd never been a good navigator. My parents used to say it was because when I was a kid, my nose was always pushed into a book during car rides. But I think it's because I'm just bad at it. So it was that. There was no way possible I could be lost, as there were no other roads that I could have possibly turned onto and gotten off track. I also found myself more frequently checking my phone to ensure I was still on the right path, which is how I almost ran into the other car. My mind was wandering, thinking about the fact that my signal bars had dropped and remained at zero for the last 20 minutes, and what possible implications that would mean if I came across some kind of emergency. I raised my eyes back to the road after Google Maps confirmed for the 20th time that I was still on the right path. That's when my brain took a beat to process that I was approaching a vehicle stopped in the middle of the lane. I slammed my foot on the brake. I stopped in time, but not by much, with maybe 5 feet separating my hood from the other car's rear bumper. My heart was pounding in my chest as adrenaline coursed through my body, but my fear quickly gave way to anger. Seriously, what the hell was this guy doing? Not only was he stopped in the middle of the road, but all his lights were off. If I didn't have my high beams on, there was a good chance I wouldn't have seen him, even if I wasn't checking my phone. I could feel my heart beating in the vein on the side of my neck. I'm not somebody who struggles with road rage, and after a couple of quick seconds, I managed to get a hold of myself, not wanting to outright alarm anyone that might still be in the vehicle. I shifted into reverse and backed up about 20 feet, popping my emergency lights on. That's when I started noticing a few strange things about the stopped vehicle, more than just the fact that the lights were out. Of course, it was stopped in the middle of the road, but that wasn't unreasonable, since there wasn't any shoulder that the driver could have moved onto. The strange thing, though, was that the doors were open, those on the driver's side crossing over slightly onto the other lane. And even more was that I saw that an item was dropped out onto the road by the rear driver's side door, something that appeared to be a child's stuffed animal. I considered my options, and after a few seconds, decided that I would have to go against my better judgment to just keep on my merry way and head outside to get a better idea of what was going on. I said earlier my job doesn't have anything to do with the story, which is mostly true. But before you judge my choices, it bears mentioning that I spent some time in the military. An obligation to help people has been drilled into me over the years, and I've seen enough things while deployed to feel I could handle myself. And so I got out of my car, but kept it running. I popped the trunk to grab the flashlight I keep there and left my headlights on so I could see what I was doing. I looked up and down the road, hoping to see signs of other cars approaching, but no luck. I called up to the other car as I cautiously started my approach, circling around to the left, to the middle of the road so I'll be able to get a look inside before I got too close. Anyone there? No answer. My headlights were helping, but there were enough shadows to still hide the car's interior. Shining my flashlight, though, easily determined that no one was inside. I moved closer, stopping down by the rear door to pick up the falling object off the ground. It was a child's toy, just like I thought, a stuffed rabbit, with patches showing signs of frequent love. I frowned. If the folks traveling in the car had hitched the ride with somebody passing by, they would have taken the rabbit, or the kid would have been throwing a fit. I shut the rear door and moved up to the front. I put my hand on the hood and found it was still warm to the touch. That means it couldn't have been here too long. I slid into the driver's seat to try and figure out if there was some kind of mechanical issue that would have forced the car to stop, and was startled to find a set of keys still dangling from the ignition. Pressing the brake, I turned the key and the engine started right up. Headlights and the interior light in the roof springing to life. Fuel, oil, temperature, battery, all the gauges looked good. Not even a check engine light. Strange. Very strange. Then I saw the purse in the passenger seat. I picked it up, a normal brown shoulder bag, and briefly rummaged around before finding a wallet inside. Everything appeared to be intact. About $40 in cash, a couple credit cards, gym membership, Sam's Club card. The driver's license named the owner as Mary Walker, a pretty blonde that had just turned 30 the month before. There were a few pictures showing Mary in stage poses, sitting on a blanket under a tree. A huge, bearded lumberjack of a man hugged her from behind. A small ponytail girl with a goofy over-exaggerated smile on her lap. That's when I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. A shiver running down to the base of my spine. Something was very wrong with this situation. I put everything back in the purse and returned it to the seat. I turned off the car and got out, shutting the driver's door behind me. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911, holding it over my head to try to get a connection with no luck. Cursing softly, I jammed the red end call button and moved around to the passenger side of the car. I played my flashlight around and noticed that some of the foliage at the edge of the road was bent and trampled, like someone had walked through it. I didn't have enough woodcraft to be able to judge how long ago they might have passed, but even then, I couldn't imagine any scenario for why they would have gone wandering away. Shining my light into the woods, the beam only extended maybe 30 feet through the trees before being effectively swallowed by the greedy blackness. Looking at all the flat grass, at the stuffed rabbit in my hand, then at the dark trees crowding maliciously, my thoughts came back and forth between what I should do. I made up my mind. I had been trained to help people. It was hardwired into my system. There was a child somewhere in the woods. I raised my foot to take a step onto the path, and that's when a white flicker of movement entered the very edge of my flashlight beam. It was Mary Walker. She was naked and walking stiffly, unnaturally, her arms swaying out of sync with the rest of her body, like a puppet being manipulated by somebody who's not an experienced puppeteer. "Hello?" her voice called out. "Anyone there?" That's when more shapes came into view behind her, shambling along. Here, the bearded man who must have been Mary's husband, then their little girl, owner of the well-loved rabbit, both moving as strange as their wife and mother. And now, I could tell there were more, many more, their forms out of the direct light, but so many they caused the darkness to pitch and swell with their strange, staggering passage. Their voices a chorus. "Hello? Hello?" They called. "Anyone there?" Echoing back the questions I was asking only a few short minutes ago when I approached the abandoned car. I took a stumbling step back, away from the woods and the approaching figures. I ended up tripping onto the Walker's car, but at that moment, I shone my light up into the pitch recess of the branches, and in doing so, I could just make out, barely, a sort of darkness figure that was crouched, hidden in the upper limits A void even darker than the trees. Was it my imagination? Those lines of pure blackness that extended from that concealed mass that seemed to pierce the flesh of Mary Walker and her kin, and the countless other shapes moving in sync with them. That's when I sprinted back to my vehicle, engine still running. Hello? I shifted to reverse, keeping enough of my head to avoid running off the road as I completed a 3-point turn. Anyone there? I took a glance in my rearview mirror. The pale form of Mary Walker stood still just at the edge of the forest where the trees met the road. One hand was raised, signaling me to return, or perhaps waving goodbye. Her face was a mask of confused sadness. I pressed the gas and drove back the way I came. I didn't look back again. The rest of the trip was a fog. At some point after I made it back to the interstate, I called my parents. I let them know that I wouldn't be getting in until late. I drove on autopilot, the traffic jam having cleared while I was off. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't. What would I tell them, and to what end? There was no one left to be helped. I try not to go through life with too many regrets, wondering about what if. But this one, this choice, what if I had left earlier in the day? What if I hadn't stopped for dinner? Maybe I would have still gone left. Maybe I would have been there in time to help the walkers. Maybe I would have been taken by that black thing that was fishing in the darkness. What if I had gone right? Would I still be ignorant, going through life, unknowing that there are these things out there? I try not to think of it too often, but every now and then, all these thoughts turn to the stuffed rabbit. It wasn't until I reached my parents' house that night that I realized I still had that rabbit clutched in my hand. I used to wonder, before man brought our roads and civilization, what was the wilderness like? What lived there? But I don't think about these things no more. I can't afford to. At least, if I don't want to wake up screaming. There are things out there in the woods, in the darkness, in places that humans still have not ventured out to. So be careful when you're out traveling, going into these country roads, and that no matter how bad the traffic is, always stick to the interstate.